Chapter 161, Agreement. Celeborn watched his granddaughter, the only child he and his wife had raised, with a painful mix of pride and worry. "Have you thought about more than just their different races?" he asked. "There's also the problem of time. Do you really want to give up immortality for a short mortal life?" Arwen shook her head. A smile warmer than sunlight curved her lips, and tenderness shone in her eyes. "Grandfather, don't worry for me. Dew rejected my suggestion that I choose a mortal fate. He would rather seek a longer life to be with me than walk with me toward death." On Dewey's side, Galadriel did not speak aloud. Instead, she reached him with a quiet, telepathic touch. She looked at him and smiled as if she were reading the deepest corners of his heart. "Lady Galadriel, do you not oppose me and Arwen?" Dewey asked, surprised. Galadriel shook her head. Her answer made his heart flutter. "I often use the mirror in the garden to see past, present, and possible futures. The visions of the future shift constantly. Each person and each action can branch the paths. They are not absolute. In Arwen, I saw two futures. In one, she chose mortality, briefly gained everything, then lost it and wandered alone into the woods, buried in an unknown place and slowly forgotten." A shadow of sorrow passed over Galadriel's face, as if she had already seen that fate. Then the sorrow gave way to surprise and something like delight as she turned her gaze to Dewey. "In the other, she meets you. The even star becomes the morning star. Her light grows brighter, like a star made whole." Galadriel smiled brightly. "How could I object to that?" Dewey understood then. The timeline Galadriel warned about, where Arwen chose mortality and was eventually lost to them, was likely the one that unfolded without him. As someone who had raised Arwen as a granddaughter, Galadriel naturally would not wish for her to give up immortality and be taken by death. Dewey's presence, however, changed that course. He had broken the old thread of fate and given Arwen a different future. No wonder Galadriel accepted their union. Dewey suddenly remembered how, the first time they met in Rivendell, Galadriel had given him the Elessar, the green gem originally meant as a dowry for Aragorn, to fasten to his staff. Had she foreseen this outcome then? He looked at her. She met his gaze with a knowing smile. He had not guessed wrong. Compared to Galadriel's foresight, the little divination he had gained through signing in felt like nothing. Celeborn, though still reluctant, feeling as if the home's treasured blossom had been taken, ultimately yielded to Arwen's resolve. Elves were loyal in love. Once their hearts were given, they rarely changed. Still, he was annoyed with Dewey and insisted they go to Rivendell to seek Elrond's blessing. So, hearts pounding, Dewey and Arwen returned to Rivendell through the hearthfire. Elrond was at first surprised and pleased to see his daughter with Dewey, but he soon sensed the deep bond between them. His brows tightened and his joy faded. "Arwen, are you truly resolved?" he asked gravely. Arwen nodded, steady and unshakable. "Yes, father, I will not change." "But rest assured, father," she added gently, "I will not take a mortal fate. Dewey would not let me. He wishes to be with me forever, not only for a single short life." She told Elrond everything Dewey had explained. Elrond regarded Dewey with a penetrating look, skeptical. "Dewey, I do not mean to make things difficult, but immortality is no trivial thing. From ancient days, the sole comparable exception was Tuor, my ancestor among men. He sailed west by the guidance of the Valar, and by Ilúvatar's own grace was set among the Eldar and counted with them. Elves do not meddle lightly with the destinies of men. Those who sought to, without right, only fell. Númenor was consumed by its own greed, and the 9 rings that made the Nazgûl were given to mighty kings of men who were twisted and enslaved for the promise of long life." Dewey explained his plan, the Phoenix. Elrond's surprise at the idea was plain. He had not expected Dewey to forge such a magnificent solution, and he realized how close Dewey was to success. Seeing that the Phoenix had Gandalf's approval, Elrond relaxed somewhat. To further reassure him, Dewey produced a sheet of parchment covered with intricate runes and diagrams and handed it over. Elrond studied the mysterious markings and became captivated. "What is this?" he asked. "This is the method to make the Philosopher's Stone," Dewey said. "It is a miraculous substance that can transmute base metals into gold and produce the elixir of life." "The Philosopher's Stone? That can create an elixir of life?" Elrond's surprise deepened. As an immortal elf, he had no need of an elixir, but he understood the cosmic implications. Mortality was Iluvatar's gift to men. Even the Valar could not overturn that design. Tuor's fate was a singular grace. If a stone could grant true immortality, it would be a wonder on the scale of Fëanor's Silmarils, a treasure that would call the attention of all peoples and even the Valar. Dewey was ready for that thought. The Philosopher's Stone has a crucial flaw, he admitted. It can grant extended life, but it cannot prevent the body from aging. The longer one lives, the more frail the body becomes. Nicholas Flamel lived centuries, but his body became like a fragile shell. If life is extended indefinitely without stopping senescence, what kind of existence is that? It is why Flamel eventually abandoned it. That was why Dewey still strove to evolve Animagus into a true phoenix. The stone's limit was too severe. A perfected phoenix form might avoid that decay. By showing Elrond the design for the stone, Dewey hoped both to reassure him and to seek Elrond's wisdom, to see if the flaw could be remedied. As the foremost Eldar sage in Middle-earth, Elrond's counsel was invaluable. Dewey did not fear leaks. The stone's promise of immortality meant little appeal to elves, and transmuting metals into gold was of less interest to them. Elrond nodded. It is a grave flaw, but even so, this is a remarkable invention, the sort that history records, he said. If the Philosopher's Stone comes to birth, your name will be linked to it, as Fëanor is linked to the Silmarils. With both the Phoenix and the stone offered as assurances, Elrond's opposition softened, though he remained cautious. He made 3 conditions to Dewey. Until Dewey genuinely secured immortality, he and Arwen could not be fully together. Dewey accepted the terms. Elrond did not forbid them from seeing each other. Instead, he took the rune parchment and Dewey's rune dictionary to study in the Hall of Fire, hoping to decipher the stone's secrets. For Dewey, however, there was no relaxation. Elrohir and Elladan promptly seized him and put him through relentless training. At nearly 2 meters tall, they said he needed to be strong. Without his wand and staff, he would be no more than a man. How could he protect Arwen then? Thus began days of hard, exhausting practice. Mornings were for sparring with Elrohir. Afternoons were spear drills with Elladan. Though they called it training, Dewey was overwhelmed. He returned to the great house of Rivendell each evening bruised and sore, applying Baishan elixir all over before he would dare lie down and sleep. The next morning, he rose and did it again. Elrohir and Elladan noticed that the elixir revived his spirits, so they pressed on harder. Their blows never truly harmed him. They were careful. But Dewey could only defend, wielding the flame sword and the spear Aeglos. Those weapons, long kept in his space pouch, saw more use in this period than ever before. One day, exhausted, Dewey shrugged off his outer robe and, wincing, tried to apply Baishan elixir to a bruised patch on his back. A light hand gently covered his and began to smooth the elixir over the sore skin. Arwen leaned over him with worry in her eyes. "If you simply gave in to my brothers, they would stop bullying you," she said softly. "Why are you so stubborn, challenging them every day?" Dewey took a sharp breath, but shook his head resolutely. "No, if I surrendered, they wouldn't let me see you. Besides, how could a man ever surrender?" Since he had stolen their beloved sister's heart, the 2 brothers had turned everything into a test. They broke up every chance of privacy and dragged him away to spar under the pretense of preparing him to protect Arwen. If he had refused, they would have mocked him for not being willing to endure for her. So, as much from pride as from love, Dewey refused to yield. There was a silver lining. Training with 2 warriors who had lived for thousands of years sharpened his skills. Even the lingering effects of the Entdrot he had drunk in Fangorn were being absorbed, strengthening his body. He became faster and sturdier, and against the brothers, he could now finally put up a respectable resistance. Chapter 162, The Expedition to Moria. Under the tutelage of Elrohir and Elladan, Dewey's martial skills improved rapidly. If he had been a soft, bookish wizard before, he was no longer so. Even without using magic, he could stand toe-to-toe with orcs, wielding his flame sword or the spear Aeglos. During this time, he drank Entdrot again. It made him grow a little taller, just over 2 meters, making him one of the taller figures even among the elves. More importantly, his body became noticeably stronger. While the Entdrot lasted, he had boundless energy, and he answered Elrohir and Elladan's training with vigor, growing more powerful each day. Duir brewed several more pots of growth potion and sent Thorondor, the great eagle, to Fangorn Forest to trade them for Entdrot with Treebeard. Thorondor was no longer a fledgling. Under Arwen's careful feeding with Lembas and Duir's own care, the eagle had bulked out and his wings had grown strong enough to circle above Weathertop. After Duir gave him Entdrot, Thorondor doubled in size and became larger than an adult great eagle. He was formally Duir's messenger, bearing potions and flying thousands of miles to Fangorn to trade. Treebeard took a liking to him and treated him with Entdrot in return. When Thorondor returned to Weathertop, he was even bigger still, so large that his wingspan approached 30 meters. When he beat those wings, they whipped up gusts like a rock covering the sky. Once he could fly, no one had to feed him. The folk at the foot of the mountain in Hogsmeade would see him set out at sunrise and return to his nest in the tall melon tree at dusk. Bilbo, too, received Entdrot from Duir for his birthday. The effect was immediate. Bilbo grew 8 centimeters and proudly declared himself the tallest hobbit in the Shire, throwing a banquet in Hobbiton to show off his new height. Time passed as Duir and Arwen grew closer, and Elrohir and Elladan continued his training. Then, one morning, a raven arrived with news from Gandalf. The dwarves were preparing an expedition to Moria. Leading the venture was an old friend of Duir's, Balin. Thorin Oakenshield, king under the mountain, would not go himself, but he gave Balin his full support to reclaim Moria and restore the glory of Khazad-dûm. The dwarves had been hesitant. Moria was swarming with orcs, and the Balrog that lurked in the depths was a threat beyond measure. The terror of a Balrog rivaled that of Smaug. Khazad-dûm had fallen overnight at the height of its power. But Gandalf's arrival in the north and the news that Duir was willing to help changed everything. With 2 powerful wizards, Gandalf and Duir's dragon Smaug potentially available, the dwarves felt their chances had markedly improved. Duir, long time no see. Balin greeted him when he stepped from the green flames of the hearth into the castle, an iron chest at his side. He blinked up at Duir's height in surprise. "My word, what have you been eating? You've grown." "An Ent's gift," Duir said with a smile. Balin looked at him with a touch of envy. "The Ents and dwarves have never been friends," he said. "They grudged us for ages. Fangorn has always been forbidden ground to my kin." Duir reflected that it made sense. Dwarves loved mining and felling trees, so they naturally clashed with the Ents who guarded the forests. He himself had nearly been on the Ents' blacklist once for burning trees in the old forest. It struck him as an odd twist of fate that Yavanna, mistress of plants, and Ale, smith of the dwarves, should be a married pair whose creations despised each other. They moved on to terms. Balin, as head of the expedition, pledged to cooperate fully with Duir. If Moria were reclaimed, Thorin would not take it as his own. Balin would rule it with autonomous authority like Dane Ironfoot in the Iron Hills. Generously, Balin promised Duir half of Moria's treasure and a permanent 1/10 share of the mithril mine. 1/10 of all future mithril from Moria would belong to Duir. Duir was taken aback. Moria's mithril was legendary. The mithril shirt Thorin had given Bilbo could have bought the whole Shire. To be granted a permanent 10th of that yield was an enormous and steady fortune. Duir accepted the offer with a smile. Smaug had long complained of being poor. This expedition would give him reason to work hard. Balin left then, to prepare men and arms at the Lonely Mountain. He and Duir agreed to meet again in a month. Duir began his own preparations. The Balrog was a Maya-level spirit of fire and shadow, a being who excelled in flame and close combat. And unlike Gandalf and other Maiar, whose powers were bound, the Balrog had no such restraint. Even Sauron, without the One Ring, might find victory against one uncertain. To mitigate the Balrog's flames, Duir set about making fire-resistant potions based on Professor Snape's notes from Hogwarts. Snape had once protected the Philosopher's Stone with a wall of black fire that even Voldemort, through Quirrell, could not pass without taking the correct draught. That potion, though no defense against fiendfire, endured almost every other magical flame. Duir could not be sure how the Balrog's fire compared to fiendfire, so he prepared for both, attempting to replicate and even improve Snape's recipe. For ingredients unknown in Middle-earth, he consulted Radagast the Brown, who knew every plant and beast of the wilds. Radagast supplied local substitutes with similar properties. After several cauldron explosions and retries, Duir finally brewed a fire-resistant potion whose effect exceeded the original. He tested it on a captured orc. After forcing it to drink, he cast fiend fire upon the creature. The orc burned to ash in the end, but it endured a few seconds longer than an unprotected body would have. Pleased, Duir tried again with another orc and poured an entire bottle down its throat. This time it survived more than a minute in fiendfire before being consumed. Short as it was, those extra seconds were invaluable. Over the next weeks, Duir continued brewing. By the appointed meeting with Balin, he had produced 5 pots of the potion. Had he had more time and fewer explosive accidents, he would have made still more. When the green flames of the hearth flared, Gandalf and Balin stepped out. Gandalf surveyed Duir with a smile. "You look like a warrior," he said. "Have the elven brothers been training you?" Duir nodded, a rueful smile crossing his face. "Elrohir and Eladon have been hard on me." Gandalf's eyes twinkled. "You took their precious Evenstar and were not driven out of Rivendell. That speaks well of the elves' upbringing. I remember when Beren sought Luthien's hand, Thingol set him an impossible task to fetch a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. You were lucky. Elrond is generous. Otherwise, you might have suffered more than you did, and you would not have had the chance to grow stronger under their guidance." Duir smiled admiringly. Lord Elrond and his sons love Arwen dearly. Then, curious, he asked where Gandalf had been. Convincing the dwarves should not have taken so long. Gandalf did not hide his travels. "I went to Dunland," he said. "There is a man there who seeks to win over the Dunlendings and stir trouble, besides dealing with the orcs. I wanted to see if I could stop him." The news settled into the room as plans for Moria began to take shape. The expedition would be dangerous, the Balrog an unmatched foe, but with allies pledged and new preparations underway, Duir felt the first sharp edge of certainty. The road to Khazad-dûm would begin soon. Chapter 162, The Watcher in the Water. Duir looked at Gandalf's face. There was no trace of joy there, and he already knew the outcome. "So it didn't work?" he asked. Gandalf nodded and sighed, his expression grave. "The Dunlendings and the Rohirrim have a long history of grievances over land. After constant instigation and sowing of discord by that person, the Dunlendings now hate the Rohirrim more than ever. They've formed an alliance with that instigator and are trying to reclaim their lands by force. I tried to persuade the Dunlending chieftain to let go of his hatred, and then I went to Rohan to ask the king to set aside territory for them. But the Dunlendings have been misled. They aren't satisfied with simply returning home. They want to conquer all of Rohan. Worse, the Dunlendings accused me of spying for Rohan and nearly imprisoned me. If it hadn't been for the flying broomstick you gave me, I might never have escaped Dunland." Duir's brow tightened. "Will the Dunlendings tell that person you were there? If they do, he might become suspicious. That could complicate things." Gandalf waved him off with a faint smile, relaxed. "Don't worry, I was in Dunland long ago, trying to persuade both sides to make peace and stand together against the darkness. Even if that person hears I went there again, he'll only assume I am doing the same old foolish work, or mock me for it. No, this won't trouble him." Duir felt relief wash over him. Balin, listening, wanted to ask about that person, but wisely kept silent. After a little more talk with Gandalf, Duir turned to Balin about the expedition. "Balin, how many dwarves have you brought? What's the plan?" Clad in armor and full of confidence, Balin patted the iron box at his side. 1,000 elite dwarf warriors fully equipped. I packed them into the box you enchanted." Gandalf added, "We'll assault Moria from the main western gate, and the Elves of Lorien will strike the eastern rear gate. We'll clear out the orcs without rousing the Balrog, then deal with the Balrog itself." When Balin opened the box, the 1,000 dwarf warriors spilled out, each in finely forged heavy armor and armed to the teeth with hammers, swords, and axes like living war machines. Even against orcs 10 times their number, they looked unafraid. Duir recognized 2 of them, Oin and Ori, from the Lonely Mountain expedition. They, too, had chosen to join Balin's company to Moria. With everyone assembled, Duir wasted no time. He woke Smaug in the cellar vault. The dragon was reluctant at first, but the promise that Moria's treasures might rival the Lonely Mountains quickly sharpened his interest. Even the presence of a Balrog was a risk he thought worth taking. At worst, he could flee, but at best, he would plunder gold. Duir also roused the serpent monster Heilbo from the Chamber of Secrets. He started out smaller than Duir expected. In a year, Heilbo had shed several skins and grown to 50 feet long, full-grown for a basilisk. A steady diet of giant spiders had fed its growth, and after devouring the Spider Queen Shelob, it had undergone a deep transformation. Its dark magic had surged, its eyes became deadlier, and its venom far more potent. Duir boxed the basilisk in a spatial chest and carried it out. Gandalf looked at Duir's preparations and exclaimed, "You've come well prepared." Duir shrugged. They were going after a Balrog. He had to bring everything he could. Mounted upon Smaug, with Balin carrying the box of dwarves and Gandalf at their side, they flew southeast. Thorondor, the Great Eagle, followed on patrol. Young, not a main force, but useful for skywatch and relaying messages to the Elves guarding the eastern gate. Smaug carried them over the South Downs, across the Greyflood, and above Eregion. Eregion, beside Khazad Dûm, had once been an elven realm founded by Noldor survivors after the War of Wrath. The Elves of Eregion and the Dwarves of Moria had traded closely. Dwarves mined mithril, Elves crafted rare works. It was there that Sauron, as Anatar, taught the smiths and the rings were forged, 3 for the Elves, 7 for the Dwarves, and 9 for men. Sauron later waged war, conquered Eregion, slew Celebrimbor, and the land became ruinous and empty, its roads and halls long abandoned. Celeborn and Galadriel had once been among Eregion's founders. Under Sauron's influence, Celebrimbor led the Gwathi Myrdain in rebellion, and Galadriel left for Lorien. Celeborn remained until the fall, then departed. They followed the old road to the Doors of Durin at the foot of the Misty Mountains. There, below the doors, lay a broad, dammed lake. The party dismounted, and Balin opened the box. "All right, lads, come out. Moria's here." The dwarves crowded out, grumbling about the box being stuffy and accusing each other of passing gas. Duir, however, stared at the lake with sudden unease. Gandalf noticed and asked, "What is it, Duir? Did you see something?" Duir pointed to the dark water. "There's something dangerous down there." He remembered the tale of Frodo and his companions, the Watcher in the Water that had attacked them here, snaring the gate with its tentacles and blocking any retreat. Gandalf's attention had been on the Doors of Durin. He had not studied the lake closely until Duir spoke. At once his face went hard. He peered at the murky surface and then stepped back, shouting, "Do not approach the lake. There is danger within." The dwarves were confused. Their chatter died away, and they turned to look at the water. Balin trusted Gandalf's judgment and immediately barked orders. "Guard the lake. Prepare yourselves." The dwarves snapped to attention, shields forming a stout wall facing the water. Then, without warning, a great tentacle burst from the lake and struck the shields. The dwarves were slammed backward. Another tentacle shot out and wrapped around Oin's leg, trying to pull him in. Ori swung his axe and severed the limb, freeing his comrade. But more than 20 thick tentacles rose at once, snatching at the dwarves and dragging some beneath the waves. "Defindo," Duir called, slashing several tentacles that had coiled about the dwarves. Gandalf, too, reacted swiftly, drawing his foe hammer and hacking at the writhing limbs to save the stunned dwarves. The creature beneath the water erupted in fury. The lake churned, and from it emerged a vast, island-sized cephalopod, dozens of pale, curled tentacles lashing skyward. "It's the Watcher in the Water," Gandalf shouted, dodging as huge tentacles slammed into the ground and gouged deep furrows. Duir slashed one tentacle clean through. The severed piece fell and writhed like a great snake, but severing limbs did little to stop the beast. Dozens more tentacles crashed toward them, blotting out the sky. Duir's hand moved faster. "Protego," he cried, throwing up an invisible shield that the oncoming limbs slammed into, sending out heavy tremors. Gandalf danced between blows, striking with his hammer, hacking through tentacles as he could. The dwarves, seeing their leaders engaged, did not stand idle. Some loosed arrows to distract the creature, while others charged with axes, hammers, and swords, hacking and smashing at the limbs, only to be flung aside and slammed to the ground. "Exploding bolt!" someone cried, and a dazzling red blast tore through the mass of tentacles in front of Duir. The explosion shredded them, sending chunks of flesh flying. A painful, ear-splitting shriek rose from the Watcher as it retracted its remaining limbs. For a moment, the dwarves dared to hope. Then the creature's severed tentacles began to glow a sickly green and regrew, faster than the eye could follow. Hissed breaths escaped everyone there. Dewyer's eyes widened in disbelief. No one had told him the Watcher in the Water could do that. Chapter 163, The Flood. The Watcher in the Water's regenerative ability caught Dewey off guard. He remembered that during the Fellowship's brief encounter, the creature had shown no sign of regeneration, but that fight had been over almost as soon as it began. The Watcher lashed out and the Fellowship fell back behind Durin's gate. No one had seen its full form or capabilities. Now, watching new tentacles grow and rejoin the fight, Dewey stayed calm. If its self-healing was strong, he had just the thing to test it, a dark art spell for crippling wounds. He raised his wand and sent the invisible curse streaking through the air. Sectum Sempra. The spell behaved unlike ordinary magic. It produced no flash or sound, no visible shimmer. A second later, one of the Watcher's tentacles split cleanly down the middle, severed as if by an unseen blade. Where the wound had been hit, a magical force prevented healing. Dark blue blood flowed steadily. Dewey's spirits lifted. He fired Sectum Sempra again and again. Soon a dozen thick tentacles lay severed, the blood turning the lake the color of ink and filling the air with a rank stench. "Well done, Dewyer," Gandalf cried, his eyes bright with approval, having just cut off a tentacle himself. The other dwarves cheered and brandished their weapons. Above them, Smaug dove and spewed scorching flame across the water. The Watcher recoiled in pain. Half its tentacles were gone, and its healing had been nullified. A flicker of fear passed through its enormous eyes. It drew its remaining tentacles in and sank beneath the surface. For a moment, everyone was frozen. Had it retreated? Balin peered into the lake, doubtful. Is it gone? Will it not come back? Gandalf shook his head and stared at the water with a hard expression. The Watcher in the Water is older and craftier than any orc. I know little of it, but I do not think it would withdraw so easily. What do we do now? Balin asked. With a water monster hiding in the lake, they could not approach Durin's gate safely. It was impossible to wade in and fight it there. Dewey's face tightened. He was watching the water line. Gandalf, look, the water is rising. Gandalf followed his gaze. The lake's surface was spreading outward, a silent, rapid swell. His face changed instantly. Run! The flood is coming! He darted for the nearest great tree with surprising agility for an old man and began to climb. Get up! Hold on to the trunks! The dwarves scrambled up the surrounding trees. Dewey yanked his flying broom from a spatial pouch, mounted it, and hovered above. The huge basin of water rolled like a turned-over bowl, sending monstrous waves toward the shore. The flood hit like an avalanche. Slower dwarves and those clinging low on branches were swept away. Some trees snapped and toppled, carrying their climbers into the torrent. From his broom, Dewey shouted, Smaug, Thorondor, help! Thorondor dove, snatching two floundering dwarves with his talons and dropping them onto a standing tree. Smaug scooped others up in massive claws. Dewey descended to give aid, using a levitation charm to guide those hauled from the water to safety. From high in a tree, Gandalf shoved his staff down and hauled two more to safety before grumbling, annoyed, as he remembered, and drew his own broom to join the rescue. The Watcher did not come up to fight openly. Instead, it used the flood as cover, tearing at trees with submerged tentacles so that dwarves fell into the water like dumplings. It was a vicious strategy, hide and strike from below, keeping Dewey, Gandalf, and the others busy. Dewyer, Gandalf said grimly, the Watcher controls the water. We must force it out, or we can't stop it. Dewey thought for a beat, then produced a leather case. Inside lay Heilbo, his basilisk. Heilbo can move in water. Maybe it can threaten the Watcher. He opened the case and tossed it onto the lake. A tentacle lashed and tried to drag the case under, but a huge snake's head burst forth and clamped onto the tentacle, injecting venom. The appendage shrank away. The Watcher, sensing the danger, bit off the poisoned limb. A 10-meter section of severed tentacle floated up. Kill it, Heilbo! Dewey hissed in Parseltongue. The basilisk nodded and dove, tracking the Watcher's scent. For a while the water churned as if a ferocious struggle raged beneath the surface. Then the dark blue lake turned inky black. Dewey felt a cold prickle of foreboding. Hylbo surfaced, shaking his head. Dewey asked quickly, "What's wrong?" "That great thing can sense danger." Before I could open my eyes to look, it sprayed ink. I couldn't see. I couldn't strike. It tried to entangle and tear me, and while I did poison one tentacle, it used currents to keep me from closing in. Parseltongue. The Watcher had adapted. It had blocked Hylbo's vision with ink and kept the basilisk at bay with water control. The two monsters were at an uneasy stalemate. Dewey's brow furrowed. Dealing with the Watcher in its element was proving nearly impossible. Forcing it from the water, however, was equally difficult. The creature was cunning. At any sign of trouble, it would hide and fight by guerrilla methods. Then, Dewey looked toward the stream that should have run past Durin's gate. Long ago, the Sauron had been blocked downstream, forming the barrier lake that now flooded the West Gate area. If they drained that barrier lake, the Watcher would be deprived of its domain and far less dangerous. Gandalf smiled faintly. "Your minds are nimble, unlike this old man's." "But we can't ruin the dam," he warned. "This lake has stood for 1,000 years. If it breaks, the downstream valleys will be flooded. Innocent folk could be swept away." Dewey had not thought of that. He nodded, then offered a solution. "Then we open a small breach and let the water out slowly without causing a flood." While Hylbo kept the Watcher busy, Dewey flew to the dam formed of stones, deadwood, and earth, spanning the valley. It was obviously constructed, likely by the Watcher itself, to enlarge its territory. To avoid a sudden deluge, Dewey instructed Smaug to carve a diversion channel with his tail, cutting a controlled spillway on the dam's flank. Water poured down the channel, swelling the Sauron, but not sending a catastrophic flood. The lake level began to fall. The Watcher railed against the loss of its water and tried to smash the channel, but Smaug held the spillway with blasts of dragonfire. Hylbo persisted beneath the surface, harrying the creature. As the level dropped, the Watcher grew desperate. Finally, when the water had fallen enough, Dewey fired an exploding bolt at the remaining dam structure. The breach widened and the remaining water poured out. All at once, the Watcher in the water could no longer hide. The lake emptied, and the full, terrible shape of the creature was exposed. 165 Durin's Gate, Chapter 164, The Doors of Durin. They had caught a glimpse of the Watcher in the water before, but when it was fully revealed, everyone was stunned by its size. The creature was roughly 50 meters long, its tentacles several times that. If measured tip to tip, it would rival Smaug, nearly 150 meters from end to end. Its body was armored in hard, scale-like plates. The dwarves' sharp arrows simply bounced off. Exposed and uneasy, the Watcher thrashed its tentacles, bared fangs and claws, and tried to drive them back. But without the concealment of the lake, it had lost much of its menace. With a flick of his wand, Dewey severed tentacles one by one. The Watcher recoiled in fear and tried to flee upstream. This was an evil waterspawn of Morgoth, born in the underground rivers of the Misty Mountains. When the dwarves of Khazad-dûm tunneled ever deeper for Mithril, they had not only awoken the Balrog, they had disturbed this thing as well. It had followed the dwarves' dug waterways to the surface and built the lake as a refuge. Now it wanted only to return to the underground currents and hide. Dewey, however, would not let it go. "Smaug, burn it," Dewey shouted. The dragon obeyed. Smaug swooped in and spewed a torrent of searing flame that washed over the Watcher. The beast hissed and writhed, spraying ink to smother the flames. But the heat had already singed its flesh. Its tentacles steamed and smelled of roasted meat. One of the dwarves sniffed, and his stomach audibly rumbled. His comrades gave him strange looks. He grinned sheepishly. "Isn't it almost dinner? I'm a bit hungry." Seeing the dragon block its escape, the Watcher plunged downstream, but a basilisk named Hylbo had been lying in ambush. As the two locked eyes, Hylbo unleashed its death gaze. The Watcher's great eyes met the basilisk's yellow stare, and in an instant its massive body froze. Muscles, flesh, and tentacles stiffened and pale as stone. The creature turned into a colossal petrified octopus, like a lifelike sculpture. Dewey flew over, brows drawn, and examined the statue. Direct eye contact with a basilisk should mean death, not merely stone. He hovered by the Watcher's eyes and saw the answer. Both were covered by a clear protective membrane. Indirect contact through that film had spared its life, but cursed it to petrification. Gandalf swept in on his broom and tapped the gray sheen with his staff. It sounded like stone. Balin hurried over and peered up at the giant figure. "Is it dead?" he asked. "I don't think so," Gandalf said. "It's petrified under a most potent curse, very difficult to undo." Dewey nodded. "Gandalf's right. The membrane prevented direct contact with the basilisk's eyes, so it didn't die outright. It was turned to stone instead. But petrification is practically the same as death," Gandalf went on. "A basilisk's curse is notoriously hard to reverse. Without the correct remedy, a petrified creature is as good as a statue." Dewey thought of mandrake potions and the only remedy he knew, a powerful restorative, like that which Dumbledore had needed in another world. Then an idea came to him. He had no desire to destroy this octopus now that it was inert. In another life, Hogwarts' Black Lake had a giant squid guardian. His own Black Lake, down by Weathertop, still lacked a guardian to stop anyone sneaking into the castle by water. A watcher in the water would be perfect. His collector's instinct prickled. He had already gathered a dragon, a giant eagle, and a basilisk. Why not add a monstrous octopus? He flicked his wrist and cast an undetectable extension charm on the leather case that held the basilisk, making the interior vast. Then he eased the petrified watcher inside, forcing the two to share the cramped space for the time being. Gandalf raised an eyebrow, but was not surprised. Dewey had already been accompanied by unusual allies. Balin, however, looked relieved and grateful. "We hadn't even reached the doors of Durin, and we were down to our last defense," Balin said. "If it hadn't been for you, Dewey, and Gandalf, I can't imagine what would have happened to us alone." Dewey thought of the grim history he knew well. In the original timeline, Balin had led 500 dwarves to reclaim Moria. At first, they met with success. They drove out orcs, settled parts of the halls, and Balin even claimed treasures such as the Axe of Durin. But soon disaster struck. Balin was killed by orcs at Mirrormere. Orc forces swarmed in through the east gate along the Silverlode and overran the dwarves. The west gate escape was cut off by the Watcher in the water. Oin was dragged into the lake and drowned. The survivors fell back, slaughtered one by one. In the end, every remaining dwarf, including Ori, perished in the chamber of Mazarbul. Throughout their retreat, the Balrog never revealed itself. Only when the Fellowship later came through Moria did they find those remains. Everything was different now. Thorin Oakenshield had not died at the Battle of Five Armies in this altered fate. He had become king under the mountain and had funded Balin's expedition years earlier. Balin's attempt to retake Moria had also been advanced by decades, and Dewey had already silenced the Watcher at the West Gate. Barring other accidents, Balin and his people might survive and truly reclaim Moria. With the Watcher dealt with, they made their way to the doors of Durin. The doors had been worked seamlessly into the stone. At first glance, they were invisible. But Gandalf was not fooled. He had stood here before the fall of Khazad-dûm, and had even searched this very wall while looking for Thrain VI, Thorin's father. He led them to a smooth stretch of stone between two tall holly trees. "It's here," he said, tapping the wall with his staff. "The doors of Durin lie between these trees." He explained for Dewey and the dwarves. They call this the Elven Gate. Celebrimbor of Eregion and Narvi of Durin crafted it together. The designs are worked with mithril in the form we call Ithildin. They only appear when touched by moonlight or starlight. "So we have to wait until night, until the moon or stars rise, to see and open it?" Balin asked. "That's what I thought," Gandalf said. Dewey stepped forward and, jokingly or not, pressed his staff to the wall and whispered, "Alohomora." Gandalf looked expectant. "Any luck?" Dewey shook his head. "No, the gate is warded with powerful enchantments. Short of the right password, no trick will force it." "Then we must wait." Gandalf sounded resigned. "Not necessarily." Gandalf turned to him, curious. "You have another idea?" Dewey smiled and reached into his spatial pocket for a small crystal vial that glowed with pure starlight. "You said the patterns show under moonlight or starlight. Does the light of Arendelle count as starlight?" Gandalf's eyes brightened when he saw the vial. "Ah, how could I have forgotten you had that?" "There's no purer starlight than this," Dewey said. He held the vial to the wall. Under the glow of Arendelle, the hidden lines surfaced, a delicate outline of a gate traced in silver white, a many-pointed star in the center, two trees bearing crescent moons, and the emblem of Durin, a hammer, an anvil, a crown, and 7 stars. Above, in Sindarin, flowed an arching line of letters. Dewey read the inscription slowly. The Lord of Moria, the doors of Durin, speak, friend, and enter. You know Sindarin? Gandalf asked in surprise. Dewey smiled. Arwen taught me. Much of Rivendell's records are in Elvish. I had to learn it to read them. Gandalf nodded. It never hurts to know more. Balin frowned. Speak, friend, and enter. What does that mean? It's plain enough, Gandalf said. If you are a friend, speak the password, and the gate will open. And what is the password? Balin pressed. Gandalf spread his hands. If I knew that, we wouldn't be standing here. Melon, Dewey said. For a beat there was silence, then the stone shimmered and the gate opened on its own. Balin gaped in astonishment. Gandalf was quicker to react and laughed softly. So that was it. I was making it far too complex. The clue was right there. Elvish words require Elvish speech. The dwarves crowded forward, excitement and expectation lighting their faces. Dewey and Gandalf exchanged a look born of caution. Both knew that past Moria, a terrible foe still waited. They stepped through, prepared for whatever lay beyond the doors of Durin. Durin's gate swung open at last, and they went in. The dwarves, reverent and awed, were the first to step across the threshold. Smaug, however, was too massive to fit into Duir's portable box, and the tunnels of Moria were far too narrow, so Duir ordered the dragon to fly to the east gate on the far side of the Misty Mountains. He remembered the Balrog had shown itself at Durin's bridge near the east gate. It would be far easier for Smaug to enter from there, and they would rendezvous to deal with the Balrog. Thorondor was told to patrol the sky above the west gate and keep any orcs from escaping that way. Inside the gate, Gandalf's voice grew stern. Be careful. There is an evil older than the Watcher in the water hiding deep under this mountain. Do not wake it unless you are absolutely certain. The dwarves' excitement vanished. They had all heard the tales of the Balrog and fell instantly solemn, gripping their weapons and watching every shadow. Moria was a maze of twisting, interlaced passages. Without someone who knew the way, they could wander forever. Fortunately, Gandalf had been here before and remembered the routes. He led them up a long, rising stair corridor. Bottomless mine shafts yawned beside the stair, remnants of Khazad-dûm's mithril workings. Veins of ore in the walls gleamed with a silver light when struck by the torches. To the dwarves, such mithril had once been common. Now they looked at the seams with feverish eyes. If the danger had been any less grave, many would have tried to pry the metal free. At the stair's end lay the 21st Hall, the 7th level's great chamber. Moria had been cut from east to west into 21 such halls. Counted from the east gate westward, the 21st Hall opened nearest the west gate. Pillars rose like an ancient forest in that chamber. Doors opened on all sides, and here was the chamber of Mazarbul, where the dwarven records had once been kept. Balin's tomb and the memory of the last standing dwarves had lain in that hall in another telling of this tale. Balin's eyes brightened when he saw an axe laid on a stone table. He ran to it, picked it up, and held it as if he had found a lost treasure. It was Durin's axe, the heirloom of Durinai, the symbol of Durin's house and of Moria's rule. Balin was ecstatic. Duir moved through the ruined library. Time and orc sacking had turned the records and books to dust. Not even a repair charm could restore them. Then a hidden arrow hissed from the shadow, aimed straight for Balin's neck. Duir snapped a shield charm up at the last moment. The arrow struck the barrier and fell to the floor inches from Balin. He inhaled hard, shaken. Duir, you saved me. Gandalf drew his sword and called, Prepare yourselves, orcs. A hollow drumbeat answered from the dark, and then many drums. The mine itself seemed to roar. Duir sent a bright orb into the ceiling, and it spread light through the rock. Thousands of orcs poured in from the 4 doors around the hall, swarming in packs and thousands strong, while towering trolls, hundreds of them, thudded behind. The dwarves split into 4 companies, each taking a doorway. The orcs flooded the openings, but the dwarves had the ground and the choke points. Orcs could only pass through those doors and were cut down in waves. The first assaults were repelled, but the orcs then hurled their great armor-plated trolls forward like living battering rams. One troll smashed the stonework of a door with its hammer and began to force its way in. Avada Kedavra, Duir cried. A flash hurled the troll backward. "Leave the trolls to Gandalf and me," he shouted to Balin. "You concentrate on the orcs." Balin nodded and gripped Durin's axe. The dwarf warriors closed and slaughtered the orcs that made it through. Duir and Gandalf turned to the trolls. Trolls were massive and stubbornly resistant to magic. Even Duir's killing curse could not always finish them. Duir, unperturbed, flicked his wand and awakened the carved statues that lined the north and south walls, monumental stone figures of past kings and master craftsmen. The statues tore themselves free, stepped down from their reliefs, and waded into the fight. They shoved aside orcs and grappled with the trolls, several great figures pinning a troll before heaving it down. Duir vaulted onto a statue's shoulder with his spear Eglos and drove it through a troll's skull until its brains were ruined. Seeing the orcs mounting attacks at the west gate, Duir opened his leather box and released the serpent Heilbo. The beast's yellow eyes stared outward. Those who met them did not live to tell of it. Heilbo guarded the west gate, while the animated statues held the north. Gandalf and the dwarves held south and east. The sight of the basilisk sent many orcs retreating in terror. Those who could not avoid its gaze were turned to grisly ends. Gandalf fought with staff and hammer, a shockwave of power from his staff to stagger a troll, then a crushing blow from his foe hammer to finish it. The dwarves, armored head to toe in works of their own smiths, were nearly impervious to the orcs' crude weapons. With the statues and Heilbo thinning the troll ranks, Duir had only to finish them off. The fighting dragged on until more than half the orcs lay dead or wounded. Drums beat a hurried retreat, and the orcs melted back into the dark. The dwarves cheered. They had cut down twice their number. Duir closed Heilbo's box and set it aside. The serpent was useful, but too deadly to keep loose among so many allies. They piled the corpses into the mine shafts, and after a short rest, pushed on. Gandalf led them east through the 20th, 19th, 18th halls and on. Small bands of orcs harried them at every step, but the dwarves handled most skirmishes. Duir and Gandalf conserved their strength. As they drew closer to the mountain's heart, the mood grew heavier. At the second hall, the enemy unleashed itself in force. A black sea of orcs, thousands and thousands, poured toward the chamber in a single, frenzied surge. Trolls came not only with clubs, but with catapults and implements to hold them in place. The orcs had become cunning. To prevent the basilisk from turning their assault to stone, they had blinded many of their trolls and mounted orcs upon them to guide their attacks. Orcs, too, had closed their own eyes. Accustomed to living in pitch-dark caverns, they navigated by smell and sound and struck with terrifying recklessness. Duir did not hesitate. "Calla Portis," he cried, and a part of the stone above a mine shaft gave way. Huge blocks and debris collapsed and buried ranks of orcs below. He also blocked stairways and passages, denying the enemy avenues of advance. Gandalf struck the ground with his staff and unleashed a blazing shockwave that hurled orcs and trolls aside. After that brief, devastating reply, neither leader intended to be drawn into a protracted grinding battle. Gandalf's face was grave as he turned to Duir. "Do you feel it? The air has warmed." Duir met the wizard's look and nodded. "Our true enemy is coming." Chapter 166, Balrog. The sudden rise in temperature could mean only one thing. The Balrog was coming. Duir and Gandalf both felt the heat and knew how terrible its power was. They could not afford to waste energy fighting the orcs and risk being caught off guard. "Don't get tangled with the orcs here. Cross the bridge of Khazad-dûm first and make for the first hall." Gandalf shouted to the dwarves. "These orcs are being driven by a greater evil behind them. That thing is about to appear." Balin didn't hesitate. He ordered the dwarves to break east with everything they had. The dwarves pushed forward, clearing the path while Duir and Gandalf covered the rear. Everyone moved fast, not daring to pause. The air grew oppressively hot, as if summer had come in an instant. The heavily armored dwarves were sweating. The rising heat was a sure sign the Balrog drew nearer. With nerves taut, they rushed toward the bridge of Khazad-dûm. The orcs never gave up the chase. Sensing the change in temperature, they seemed both terrified and frenzied. The orcs of Moria served the Balrog as worshippers and wardens, gathering information for it, enforcing its rule. Azog, the orc king Duir had slain, had been their leader. In effect, Duir already had a connection to the Balrog. Duir and Gandalf fought off the pursuing orcs and hurried after the dwarves. At last they reached the bridge of Khazad-dûm. The bridge spanned the chasm between the first and second halls, hanging over a bottomless gulf. Narrow and railless, it was only wide enough for a single file and had been built as a last point of defense. The dwarven builders had never expected an enemy to rise from the abyss below the bridge. Down in that void, fires flickered, and the heat was unbearable. Gandalf peered into the darkness and stiffened at the sight of flames leaping from below. Cross the bridge quickly. More than 1,000 people could not cross in moments, especially on a single-file bridge. Duir acted at once. "Engorgement charm," he cried. The stone underfoot swelled and widened, the bridge broadening into a passage wide enough for a dozen men abreast. "Hurry," Duir urged. Hope surged through the dwarves as they charged across. Duir and Gandalf kept the rear. Seeing the flames climbing nearer and feeling the scorching heat, Duir pulled 2 potions from his pouch and handed one to Gandalf. "A fire resistance potion I brewed beforehand. It can even hold against fiendfire for a short while. Drink it." Gandalf accepted the cool bottle and drank it in a single swallow. Relief lit his face. "Bless you, this is excellent." Duir drank his own potion. A coolness rushed through him, a shiver running his spine. The heat that had pressed in on him was suddenly ineffective. No sooner had the last of the dwarves crossed than flaming fury erupted from the abyss. A long lash of fire shot up at Duir and Gandalf. Duir's wand became a staff in his hand as he threw up a great shield. "Protego Maxima," he cried. The blazing whip struck the barrier with a crashing sound, and ripples ran across the shield. With the rear briefly secure, Gandalf shouted to the dwarves, "Don't stop! Go to the first hall, the east gate." Balin saw the fiery lash and the inferno below and led his company away without hesitation. Freed from caring for the rear, Gandalf and Duir turned their full attention to the enemy. The fire lash recoiled, then an immense, scorching column of orange flame burst from the chasm and struck the far side of the bridge. Several nearby orcs, unable to escape, were burned to ash. The rest hung back, terrified yet rapturous, gazing at the flames as if at a god. Through the heat and smoke, a figure took shape, a giant cloaked in shadow with a burning heart at its core. 2 yellow, molten eyes glared from a mane of flame, a head like a wild ox, great twisted horns, shadow-formed wings, and a long fiery tail trailing behind. The Balrog, one of the fallen Maiar, loomed over them like a living furnace, radiating heat that melted the stone and threw steam into the air. Seeing Gandalf and Duir standing in the heat, the Balrog's anger flared. It drew a huge sword, black smoke and fire licking its blade, and swung it down at them. The blow shivered Duir's magic barrier into ruin. "Duir, lend me your sword of flame," Gandalf shouted. Duir drew his sword of fire and hurled it to Gandalf. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. The dark fire shall not avail you, flame of Udun," Gandalf declared, the words ringing over the abyss. The blade in his hand flared into a white, sacred heat that burned without smoke. He met the Balrog's sword with that white fire, and the clash of blades shoved both combatants back several paces. Duir lifted his staff and loosed the death curse he had been preparing. "Avada Kedavra!" A dazzling, eerie green light blazed from the staff, a deathly aura far greater than anything he'd used before. The Balrog reacted with lightning speed, slashing its fiery greatsword to intercept the curse. Death magic and fire met with a thunderous explosion. The green light detonated, obliterating everything nearby. The Balrog was cast aside, and its fiery greatsword shattered into countless glowing fragments. The shock threw Duir and Gandalf back, and when the dust and ash cleared, they watched the Balrog warily. Duir's heart sank. He had expected the Avada Kedavra to do more. He had hoped to at least cripple the Balrog, but it had merely dispersed one weapon and blasted the creature back. He couldn't afford self-reproach now. The Balrog was still a terrible foe and would strike again. The Balrog roared, and a tidal wave of molten flame surged toward them. "Aguamenti!" Duir cried, slamming his staff down. A wall of spring water surged up to meet the fire. Water is said to quench fire, but the Balrog's flames were so intense the wall hissed and boiled away. Duir had to constantly summon more water, trying desperately to hold back the inferno. Gandalf rose as well, crossing his white-flamed sword and staff above his head to raise a radiant shield. "Back into the shadow," servant of Morgoth, he thundered. The light shield pushed the demonic fire away, but the Balrog lashed with its long, fiery whip, each strike eating away at the luminous barrier. Gandalf forced the shield larger and larger, grunting under the strain, but the Balrog's full power, unrestrained, steadily ground the protection down until it shattered. Gandalf staggered, propping himself on his staff and gasping. Seizing the moment, Duir pulled a leather case from his spatial pouch and hurled it at the Balrog. The creature struck it with blazing fury. The case exploded on contact, its internal magic collapsed and its contents spilled out like vomit. In an instant, a tide of water, enough to cover a football field, poured over the Balrog and spread across the bridge. Water hitting red-hot metal hissed and steamed. Ordinary water could not put out the Balrog's flames, but the deluge unsettled it. Along with the flood, a massive stone likeness of the Watcher in the water materialized. The Balrog recognized the creature. The Watcher and the Balrog had long ruled neighboring territories, both born from the deep places. The Balrog's fiery eyes flickered with surprise. It lashed out to incinerate the statue, but a serpent head suddenly slid from the Watcher's slightly opened mouth. The serpent basilisk Hilbo, hidden within, launching a surprise attack. Hilbo's yellow, deadly eyes met the Balrog's, its strongest gaze locked onto the falling Maya. The Balrog staggered under the psychic onslaught. The basilisk's eyes could not slay a Maya outright, but they clouded its mind, dazed it, snatching away a beat of reaction. Duir seized the opening. He planted both hands on his staff, pouring every ounce of his power into the spell, and spoke the curse again. Avada Kedavra! The green light flared into a bolt as thick as a bucket and struck the Balrog. Chapter 167, Descent into the Abyss. Avada Kedavra struck the Balrog dead on. The creature shrieked, wounded, its flames sputtering wildly. Dewey panted, leaning on his staff, a smile of relief involuntarily crossing his face, until his expression froze and his pupils narrowed. The Balrog had broken free from the basilisk's gaze. It lashed out with its flame sword, and the Watcher in the water that had been blocking its path, along with the basilisk that had ambushed it, were hurled screaming into the bottomless abyss. Before Dewey could worry about the fate of Hilbo the serpent, the Balrog gave a low, menacing roar. All the surrounding fire was drawn back into its body, like a whale taking in water. Its dimmed flames surged anew, emitting blistering heat. It conjured a flame scepter and swung it. Hotter, more furious fire burst forth, racing straight toward Dewey and Gandalf. Dewey's face hardened. He slammed his staff to the ground and poured every ounce of magic into a shield. Super Protego. Protego Totalum. Impervious. A massive magical barrier sprang up, enveloping him and Gandalf, but the Balrog's heat was overwhelming. The surrounding rock began to melt into lava. Even the ward Dewey had raised started to thin and run. His fire resistance potion was fading. The heat became real and immediate. He didn't hesitate. He pulled several more potions from his robe and swallowed them, then shoved one toward Gandalf. Gandalf, drink this now. If you don't, the Balrog won't kill us. The heat will. Gandalf tipped his head back and drank, then turned to face the inferno. He took Dewey's flame sword in his hand, and the fire ring on his finger, Narya, flared for the first time, blazing brilliantly. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor. The dark fire shall not avail you. Flame of Udun, no evil spirit may pass. Narya gathered the fire around him and set the flame sword ablaze with a holy, roaring light. Gandalf and Dewey stood in a maelstrom of flame, Gandalf's white, purifying fire clashing against the Balrog's dark blaze. The entire mine filled with fire, a sea of orange and white heat. Orcs trapped nearby were consumed and turned to ash. Rock formations cracked and melted. Dewey allowed himself a brief relieved glance. Good thing he'd stocked those potions, otherwise the temperature alone would have cooked them alive. Seeing Gandalf hold his ground, Dewey drew Arundel's light from its crystal vial and tapped his staff. Lumos, what had been an ordinary charm, combined with Arundel's light, produced an astonishing effect. The vial's radiance erupted, a purifying brilliance that pushed back the Balrog's dark fire. The Balrog recoiled, stung by the light, forced to beat its shadowy wings to shield itself. For a moment, Dewey and Gandalf seemed to have the advantage, but both knew it would not last. Their joint power could not match a Balrog's forever. Unless they finished it quickly, they would be the ones to die. Then, from the direction of the first hall to the east, a deafening roar split the air. Dewey and Gandalf's faces lit up. Help had arrived. A massive dragon smashed through the mountain wall, armored scales flashing, wings beating the dust out of the chamber. "Master, I am here! The great dragon Smaug has come to save you," the creature boomed. "Less talk, more help. Deal with the Balrog," Dewey snapped. "Watch this." Smaug, full of swagger, inhaled and let loose a torrent of dragon fire. It struck the Balrog, but the creature did not even blink. Instead, it greedily drank in the dragon fire, its flames swelling brighter, its aura growing stronger. Smaug's jaw dropped. Dewey scowled. "You imbecile. It's a creature of fire. Why are you pouring more fire on it? Don't roast it with flame. Pin it with your body." Smaug snapped out of his surprise and lunged, trying to bite and grapple the Balrog. He was huge, 100 meters long, and his bulk could at least hold the foe for a time. As a fire-breathing dragon, Smaug had some resistance to the Balrog's flames, but he remained flesh and blood. The Balrog, a fallen Maya, was a demigod of fire. Smaug could not hope to kill it, only to distract it. The dragon bit and tore, lashed with claws and tail, even tried to swallow the Balrog whole. The Balrog swung its flame sword, struck back, and the two of them grappled in a blaze that eased the pressure on Gandalf and Dewey. At that moment, the system finally responded. "Hogwarts sign-in system. Location, Moria. Do you wish to sign in?" Dewey's heart leapt. He shouted inside his mind. "Sign in. Sign in now." Sign in successful. Congratulations on obtaining Wald's improved Fiendfire curse. A memory flooded. Grindelwald's experiments with Fiendfire. Fiendfire was a horribly destructive flame that consumed almost anything, Horcruxes included, but it was notoriously uncontrollable. Grindelwald had perfected and improved it, adding a terrible refinement. It could distinguish friend from foe. Those loyal to him could stand unharmed amid the blaze. Enemies would be annihilated. Elation surged through Dewey. He cast the improved Fiendfire at once. A blue inferno spat from his wand, wild and ravenous. The flame ate everything combustible in its path, even some of the Balrog's own dark fire, and coalesced into the shape of a second Balrog, wreathed in eerie blue flame. Gandalf flinched, but a moment later discovered the Fiendfire did not burn him. The Balrog, meanwhile, turned its yellow eyes to this mocking doppelganger. Under Dewey's control, the Fiendfire Balrog roared and charged. The real Balrog surged to meet it, whip and sword flying. Blue and orange flame tangled, sending waves of heat and sparks in every direction. Stone and metal melted. Everything looked as though it were in a boiling sea of lava. Still, the Balrog was a master of flame. The Fiendfire shape was eventually torn apart and dissolved back into flame. Seeing Fiendfire fail to permanently hinder the Balrog, Dewey recalled the original timeline. Gandalf had fallen into the abyss with the Balrog, and the Balrog's fire had been extinguished when it plunged into deep water. Water was different than Dewey's previous attempt to douse it. That water had simply vaporized. He turned to Gandalf. "Gandalf, in what kind of water do the Balrog's flames go out?" Gandalf paused, then realization brightened his face. "Ulmo, Vala of the waters, is lord of all waters. Anywhere there is flowing water, he rules. He abhors Morgoth and his servants. Balrogs are greatly weakened in water. If we can lure this thing into water, perhaps we can quench its fire and sap its strength." The question was where. Both men followed their instincts and glanced at the bottomless abyss before them. "I can feel moisture down there. There must be water at the bottom," Gandalf said. Dewey knew it too. The problem was how to lure the Balrog into the chasm. Below, the Balrog renewed its assault on Smaug. It used the flame scepter to project superheated blasts that ate through the dragon's armor and singed its scales red. Smaug bellowed in pain. Though resistant to fire, he could not endure the Balrog's relentless dark flames forever. Gandalf planted himself squarely on Durin's bridge, flame sword blazing. The Balrog sauntered onto the bridge, whip lashing like a living, hissing thing. Where the whip passed, the air itself ignited. Gandalf slipped aside, swung his sword to meet the lash, and the impact sent a shockwave across the stone. Sparks flew, and the bridge groaned under the force. Gandalf stumbled back, his blade's flame dimmed. The Balrog's sneer widened, and it pressed the attack. "Avada Kedavra!" Dewey hurled the killing curse. The Balrog raised its whip just in time. The lash struck the spell and shattered it. The Balrog was momentarily distracted. Seizing the chance, Gandalf drove his staff into the bridge. The stone shuddered and then exploded. The central span of Durin's bridge shattered and collapsed. With a terrible howl, the Balrog's feet lost purchase, and its massive form tipped over the broken edge, falling into the abyss. For a heartbeat, the Balrog plunged downward, and then a fire whip shot up from the depths and coiled around Gandalf. Protego. Dewey was ready. He threw a shield around Gandalf. The whip slammed against it and recoiled. Like a serpent, it lashed out again, wrapping itself around a rock projection above the chasm and hauling the Balrog upward. Dewey acted at once. He drew Aeglos, the divine spear, gathered every ounce of power into it, and rammed it deep into the stone beneath his feet. The bedrock sheared. The remaining half of the bridge, the jutting rock face overhanging the abyss, cracked and collapsed. The shattered span and huge chunks of stone tore away and plunged into the chasm, falling upon the Balrog that was clawing its way upward. Chapter 169, Unnamed Creature. Smaug, get us down fast! Dewey and Gandalf leapt onto Smaug's back. The dragon nosed over and plunged into the abyss. The chasm beneath Durin's bridge was not a dwarven excavation, but a natural fissure driven deep into the mountain, so deep that no dwarf had ever measured its bottom. They fell into utter blackness, the wind shrieking past them, stinging their faces. Time blurred, minutes or hours, until at last Smaug spread his wings and slowed their fall. "Master," Smaug warned, "the Balrog is below. It's climbing up." They leaned out into the void and saw a glow far beneath them, growing brighter. The Balrog clambered up the smooth stone as if it were flat ground, its fiery whip lashing. The cold air around them heated as the creature drew near. Dewey fumbled for the last 3 bottles of fire resistance potion and handed one to Gandalf and one to Smaug. After drinking, Smaug shuddered. The fire in his belly went out, and he could not breathe flame. "Don't let the Balrog escape," Dewey ordered. "Hold him tight. If he falls into the water below, his power will be diminished." The Balrog's whip lashed and wrapped around Smaug's foot. Smaug bit down on the fiery lash, hauled, and seized the Balrog. Then, clutching the demon, he began to fall again. The Balrog writhed, spewing hellfire that engulfed Smaug and the 2 riders. The potion protected Dewey and Gandalf from instant immolation, but they both felt the heat. The effect would not last long. Gandalf had no staff. He leapt from Smaug onto the Balrog's back, driving Flame Sword into the beast and striking with his foe hammer. Dewey, buffeted by the wind, gripped his staff and poured everything into a spell. Golden Bell Grounding. As the spell hit, the weight of their fall surged, pressing them downward. Dewey nearly floated free and had to cling to Smaug's tail to avoid being flung off. A blast of cold mist rushed up to meet them. "We're almost at the bottom," Smaug shouted over the roar. Sensing water below, the Balrog doubled its fury, erupting in a tempest of flame. Heat licked at Dewey. His clothes and his spatial bag began to char and crackle. The bag tore open and its contents spattered outward. Dew snatched up his spear, Aeglos, and hurled himself at the Balrog, driving the divine point into one of the creature's eyes. The spear cleaved through, blowing half the Balrog's head away. Its flaming flesh regenerated instantly, but for a heartbeat, the Balrog staggered, dazed. They reached the water. "Dampening and speed reduction," Dewey shouted. He, Gandalf, and Smaug hung a few inches above the surface, spared from impact. The Balrog plunged straight in with no such mercy, sending a geyser of steam and the sizzle of fire meeting water. They hit the water hard. Cold bit through Dewey to his bones. It felt like plunging into an ice cavern. He cast a ball of light and saw the scene around them, Smaug and Gandalf nearby, and the Balrog, its flames extinguished by the plunge, reduced to a viscous, dark shape. Still dangerous, but far weaker, about the same strength as Gandalf now. A hiss sounded from the gloom. Serpent monster Heilbo slid from the water, eyes half closed in a grin. "Heilbo," Dewey breathed. He had feared for the basilisk when it and the petrified water watcher had been flung into the chasm, but Heilbo was unharmed. "Heilbo, get to Gandalf," Dewey commanded. "Use your eyes and venom." Heilbo darted beneath the Balrog and bit at its leg, injecting potent venom. The demon howled. The poison further sapped its strength. Dewey used Axio to reel in the items spilled from his burned bag. "Gandalf, catch your staff," he called, and tossed it. Gandalf snatched it, his face lighting with relief. With staff in hand, he unleashed a powerful spell that hurled the Balrog back. Dewey followed with a death curse. Avada Kedavra! The beam struck the Balrog's weakened form. It shrieked in pain and grew still weaker. Surrounded, Gandalf, Smaug, Dewey, and the basilisk, the Balrog broke off and fled into a narrow tunnel. "Pursue! Don't give him time to recover," Gandalf cried. The passage was too tight for Smaug. He doubled back, carrying the still petrified Water Watcher to safety, while Heilbo bore Dewey and Gandalf in pursuit. Heilbo's keen senses tracked the Balrog's trail without guidance. The tunnels below the abyss were a bewildering maze, bored through the stone by some unknown hand, dense and intricate like the passages of a living thing. Gandalf's tension grew as they ran. "There are things down here," he said quietly, almost afraid of the words. "Creatures older than Sauron himself, nameless things. We must avoid them." "No one even knows what they are," he murmured. "If the Balrog hadn't been in a frenzy, it would never have risked them." They closed on the Balrog, but it suddenly made a sound unlike any scream or roar they had heard, a high, short, terrified shriek, animal and utterly humanless. The Balrog did not fight. It fled with blind haste toward a tunnel that led upward. Gandalf and Dewey felt it as well, an urgent warning in the way Heilbo swam, as if something far worse pursued them. The very earth seemed to quake. Dust and rubble rained from the tunnel ceiling. Then a strange silence fell, not merely a lack of noise, but a swallowing of all sound, as if a heavy curtain drew across the world. A deeper darkness pooled ahead of them, not merely absence of light, but a presence that erased color and shape. An ancient, wordless whisper shivered through Dewey, not by his ears, but down to his soul, cold, hungry, and full of malice. A nameless fear curled like a cold snake around his heart, squeezing until his breath felt small and thin. Chapter 169, The Death of the Balrog. Just as Dewey felt the darkness about to swallow him, a wave of warmth and courage surged through his body, easing the despair in his heart. Gandalf had wrapped him in the power of Narya, the Ring of Fire. Instinct overcame dread. Dewey braced his staff and began to play the magical music Tom Bombadil had taught him. The music called forth a Patronus, a faint, steady light like a candle struggling in a swamp. Its glow fought back the clinging dark and bought them a precious instant of clarity. The presence behind them hesitated at the music, but the whispers then sharpened into 1,000 needle-like pricks at Dewey's mind. The basilisk swam with them, bearing Dewey and Gandalf on its back, closely following the frantically fleeing Balrog. The hunter had become the hunted. The massive Balrog twisted and lashed out in the dim light, carving a narrow path through the suffocating darkness. Yet the nameless thing from the abyss, an unseen terror with a cold, frozen will, remained fixed on them like a stalking gaze. After what seemed an eternity, a faint light finally appeared at the end of the tunnel. The Balrog surged forward, the basilisk following, and they shot out of the dark into a dwarf passage marked by tools and chisel cuts. The nameless presence still lingered as a shadow, and they dared not stop, climbing the secret way. Only when they reached Khazad-dûm's lowest levels did that oppressive gaze at last vanish. They had escaped. Relief washed over them in ragged breaths and trembling bodies. Dewey's back was soaked. He could not tell whether it was cold sweat or water. "What was that thing?" he asked, voice unsteady. "A creature of the deep places, gnawing at the foundations of the earth," Gandalf said, taking a long breath, and then let it be. "Forget it for now. Unless it is the end of days, it will not come to the surface. Worrying about it will only invite more trouble." Then Gandalf's face hardened as he turned his attention to the Balrog before them. "Ulmo's deep waters have put the Balrog's flames out for the moment. We must kill it now, before it can relight and regain its strength." The Balrog turned to face them. Its eyes burned with an ancient hatred, furious, resentful, relieved that it had escaped death, only to be hunted again. With a roar that shook the caverns, it seemed to try to fling off the fear it had suffered below. Then, to Dewey and Gandalf's surprise, it fled. "After it!" Gandalf shouted. They mounted the basilisk and gave chase up the endless spiral stair that climbed from the dungeon toward the heights. The broomstick that once could fly had long since burned to ashes under the Balrog's fire. Only the basilisk remained as their mount. Both they and the Balrog were grievously weakened, but the creature was still terrifying, its razor claws and viscous, clinging bulk as dangerous as a coiling venomous snake. Seizing a moment, Dewey poured all his malice into the killing curse and shouted, Avada Kedavra! The green light struck the Balrog, which howled in agony. Its eyes dimmed and its aura faltered. Hailbow, the serpentine basilisk, swept in to entangle the Balrog, locking eyes and striking. The serpent bit fiercely into the Balrog's neck and injected venom. In pain, the Balrog tore Hailbow away with metal claws and hurled it aside. But Gandalf counterattacked. His sword flamed white and plunged into the Balrog's waist, adding yet another grievous wound. Weakened and sensing death, the Balrog fled again up the stair, this time reckless. Dewey and Gandalf were scarcely better off. Their robes were tattered, skin blistered and burned, every breath a stab of pain and the tang of blood. Even Narya's warmth could not erase the exhaustion that had hollowed their souls. Dewey, especially, had pushed himself beyond his limits by repeatedly channeling Avada Kedavra through his staff. Without Narya's support, he could not have gone on. Still, they could not afford respite. They climbed and fought on, perhaps tens of thousands of steps, until a great slanted fissure yawned ahead like an axe split in the earth. Cold air, the thin bite of high mountains, rushed in. They burst out together. Snow blanketed everything. The wind cut like 1,000 icy blades across Dewey's face. Before them rose a vast peak, Silvertooth Peak of the Misty Mountains, and upon it a colossal tower carved from single slabs of stone, Durin's Tower. Sheer cliffs plunged away on every side to clouded depths. No sooner had the Balrog crossed onto the summit than new flames leapt across its body. Its aura flared, and in its hand the flaming whip reformed. It was not what it had been before. Severely diminished, the Balrog burned all the fierceness of its terror and wrath into destructive force. The whip cracked through the freezing air, a heat wave that could melt steel, and lashed toward them. "Exploding bolt!" Dew shouted, unleashing the fullest power of his staff. The dazzling bolt met the whip and detonated it into a shower of fiery meteors. Gandalf slammed his staff down and sent a blinding wave of light that struck the Balrog hard, hurling it against Durin's tower. Stone cracked, seams opened, and carved walls bloomed and flowed like molten rock under the onslaught. Hailbow circled, eyes fixed, poised to strike again. From the eastern cliffs, a stirring of clouds gave way to a thunder of wings. A great dragon tore free of the mist and dove at Durin's tower. Smaug had arrived. He struck with the force of his tail like a battering ram, smashing the Balrog against the tower. Stone could not withstand the blows. The tower shattered, and tons of rock rained down upon the creature. The Balrog staggered, its flames guttered. Dewey and Gandalf seized the moment. Joined by Smaug's savage strikes, they pummeled the Balrog relentlessly. Fire stung the summit, and lightning arced as the weather itself turned. Seeing the storm gather, Gandalf's face lit with grim joy. He raised his staff toward the roiling clouds. "I am the messenger of wind and cloud, the master of thunder," he thundered from the peak. "Foul flame of Udun, you have no place in the sky." Answered by the storm, a bolt of lightning as thick as a pail came plummeting from the cloud. Gandalf caught it with his staff and channeled it outward at the Balrog. The creature tried to raise a shield of flame, but against that raw thunder, the fiery barrier shattered. Lightning drove through its bulk, and for a beat all seemed still. The endless fire that had clung to the Balrog went out like a snuffed candle. Charred flesh and blackened, sulfur-stinking hide were exposed. The flames inside it cooled and dimmed. It could not relight them. Gandalf looked spent, every fiber of his being taxed. "Dewey, drive the divine spear into its heart," he rasped. Dewey did not hesitate. He rushed forward, grasped the long spear, and with everything he had hurled it into the Balrog's burning chest. The creature gave a last, soul-shattering scream that echoed from cliff to cliff across Silvertooth Peak, a sound full of pain, fury, and the despair of annihilation. Its burning eyes went out forever. Only a viscous, oily black mass remained, reeking of sulfur. When the Balrog fell still, Dewey collapsed to the snow, utterly spent. He could not even pull the spear free. Every part of him ached. His magic was drained dry. His flesh was burned. Exhaustion and pain weighed him down like a leaden cloak. Gandalf was no better off. His robes were ragged and singed. His beard burned away in places, flesh marked by the Balrog's fire. Even his staff looked charred and battered. And yet, amid their ruin, both men smiled with a relief they had never known. The Balrog was dead. 171. Post-war Chapter 170, After the Battle. Oh, Dwyer, you look a right mess. Gandalf leaned on his staff, perched on a rock, and teased him. If Arwen saw you now, she might not want you anymore. Relaxed at last, Dwyer took the rare chance to tease the wizard back. You're not exactly presentable yourself, Gandalf. You've lost your beard and your eyebrows, and your gray robes are in tatters. If anyone saw you, they'd think you were a beggar. Dwyer's remark made Gandalf stroke his chin with mock despair. My poor beard, such care, and now it's gone. He patted his tunic and then fumbled, drawing back his hand. And my pipe and tobacco, both gone. I could do with a puff to steady my nerves. Dwyer could only sigh. The pipe and tobacco had been burned to ashes in the fight with the Balrog. He could conjure a pipe, but not pipeweed from nothing. Once their breathing and strength returned a little, they went together to where the Balrog lay. In death, it looked like cooled lava, grotesque and ugly, still radiating a terrible heat. Dwyer drew Aeglos, the spear, free from where it had been driven into the creature's chest. Seeing no more flames on the Balrog's body, he frowned. Gandalf, the Balrog is dead, and its fire has gone out. The undying flame I need, it hasn't been extinguished too, has it? Gandalf smiled and shook his head. It's called the undying flame for a reason. The flame you seek is in the Balrog's heart. At once Dwyer picked up the flame sword and began to cut open the Balrog's chest. There were no organs like those of a beast. Inside it resembled a furnace. At its core sat a red crystal, the size of a football, cracked where Aeglos had pierced it. Within the crystal, a small cluster of black flame flickered. Though the outer crystal dulled some of its heat, it still felt perilous. Merely looking at it stung, as if it could burn spirit as well as flesh. This is the Balrog's magic crystal, its heart, Gandalf explained. As long as the crystal remains intact, the Balrog is not truly gone. If it is merely buried in a volcano, it could be reborn in 1,000 years. And if I use it as phoenix fire, will there be any danger? Dwyer asked, anxious. Do not worry, Gandalf replied. Once the flame within the crystal is purified, it will pose no hidden threat. Relief washed over Dwyer. All right, we should go down. Balin and the others must be waiting. It was too high and cold on the peak. Their wounds needed tending. Dwyer asked Smaug to carry the Balrog's body. He and Gandalf climbed onto the dragon's back. Even the great serpent Heilbo looped itself about Smaug's leg and came along, a flying snake for once. Smaug bore the two riders, the Balrog's corpse and the serpent, winging eastward across the misty mountains. After passing through thick clouds, they dropped down into Dimril Dale, east of Moria. While Gandalf and Dwyer had grappled with the Balrog in the abyss, Balin and 1,000 dwarves had not been idle. Orcs had held the east gate of Moria and the first hall. Balin and his warriors drove them out, pursuing them into the Dimril Dale beyond the gate. The Elves of Lorien guarded the dale from without, forming a pincer with the dwarves and steadily eradicating the hostile bands. By the time Smaug descended, the fighting in the dale had ended, and the dwarves and elves were clearing the field. The elves were the first to spot the dragon. A dragon, someone cried. Don't be alarmed, it's Gandalf and Dwyer. Balin called, joy lighting his face the moment he recognized the riders. 10 days had seemed like a lifetime since Dwyer and Gandalf cut the way at Durin's Bridge. The bridge and the cliff had been destroyed. For a time, Balin had feared they had fallen into the abyss with the Balrog. Only when Smaug had re-emerged 2 days earlier had he learned there had been a struggle beneath the mountain. Still, until they returned alive, Balin had not felt easy. Smaug had seemed to answer some intuition and flown towards Silverlode Peak. Then thunder and lightning and geysers of flame had risen from the peak. The elves below did not know what had happened, but Balin guessed that a great foe had been fought. Seeing the dragon land in the dale and the two figures upon his back, he ran forward. Gandalf, Dwyer! Balin cried. When I heard you fell into the abyss, I was near fainting. It is such a blessing to see you safe. It is good to see you, Balin, Gandalf replied, smiling. Only a few days, and yet it felt like an age. Dwyer barely paused for greetings. His eyes widened at the sight of an elf approaching. Arwen, clad now in elven battle garments, a sword at her hip and a staff in hand, moving like a Valkyrie. She stepped lightly toward him, tenderness and concern in her eyes. The orcs that fled Moria threaten Lorien, she said. I came to help clear them out. I was so worried about you." She did not ask the details of the fight. She reached out as if to touch the scars on Duir's face and hands, then drew back, afraid to hurt him. A small frown creased her brow. She could not hide her pain. Duir grinned and put her at ease. "Don't worry. These wounds are only on the surface. They'll heal once we get some potions." "And we killed the Balrog," he added, nodding toward the monstrous corpse at Smaug's feet. "See that dark thing? That was its true form, majestic when burning, but hideous when stripped of its flame." Arwen glanced at the Balrog and then turned her full attention back to him. From the silken pouch Duir had given her, she produced a bottle of Entdraught and pressed it into his hands. "Drink this. It will mend you." Duir looked at the bottle with surprise. "Isn't this the one I gave you before? Why didn't you drink it yourself?" Arwen smiled softly. "I do not gain much from Entdraught. I kept it for someone who needed it more." "Drink quickly," Gandalf urged, for the cold and the burns still stung. Duir poured half the draught into a second bottle and handed it to Gandalf. The wizard did not hesitate. Both men drank. As the draught worked, their exhaustion and pain ebbed away. Burned flesh knitted together. Strength and magic returned. Gandalf lamented only that his beard and eyebrows had not regrown. A hush fell as the others looked at the Balrog's corpse. "Is this the legendary Balrog?" The dwarves and elves murmured, some in awe and some in fear. Even dead, the creature's lingering aura made the hairs rise on arms. Those who had not faced it could not imagine the terror it once wrought. For Gandalf and Duir, there was reverence and gratitude in every eye. This was the foe that had ruined Khazad-dûm and made Moria a place of dread for 1,000 years. Balin's heart swelled with a different feeling: hope. With the Balrog slain, if they could destroy or drive out the remaining orcs, the dwarves could reclaim Moria and its mithril halls. Balin assured Duir and Gandalf that the dwarves could finish clearing the fortress. They trusted their warriors. Duir and Gandalf, their spirits spent, were content to let them. To make sure none escaped, Duir had Smaug take station at Moria's west gate, denying any fleeing orcs a route of retreat. He and Gandalf, meanwhile, would visit Lorien and Lady Galadriel to pay their respects and recover. Before leaving, Duir borrowed the dwarves' spatial chests. He had the Balrog's body, the Watcher in the water that Smaug had brought up from the abyss, and the basilisk packed away. Then, accompanied by Arwen and other elves, Duir set out for Lorien. Balin and his company remained, beginning the vast and arduous work of reclaiming Moria. Chapter 171, Heart of the Balrog Lorien. Caras Galadhon, in the halls of the Lord and Lady. Celeborn and Galadriel received Dewey and Gandalf with warm admiration. "A Balrog in the mines of Moria, and you two slew it. What a deed!" Celeborn exclaimed, eyes bright with respect. The flash on Silverlode Peak could be seen even here in Lorien. In time there will be songs of that night. The Grey Wizard and the Black-Robed Wizard on the mountaintop, driving down the last Balrog of Middle-earth and bringing a measure of peace to Moria. Gandalf laughed softly, shaking his head. "What will the songs say?" "Lord Celeborn, Lady Galadriel, you who see far can look through the mists, but what can those below know when they see only a peak lost in a blizzard, thunder rolling, lightning arcing, tongues of fire spitting from the mountain?" "Someone always knows. Wind and snow and mist cannot hide your deeds," Galadriel replied, smiling gently, her eyes full of starlight. Her gaze drifted to the robes Gandalf and Dewey wore. Even robes raised by transfiguration could not escape her sight. "You both look weary. Go and wash the dust and fatigue from you in the Nimrodel. I will have fresh robes brought for you to change into." They did not refuse. Familiar with the way, Gandalf and Dewey walked to the Nimrodel without a guide and waded into its chill waters. The mountain-fed stream bit cold into Dewey's bones. He shivered despite the heat that still clung to him from the Balrog. The elves had sung of Nimrodel's restorative power, and it did not lie. As the river flowed over him, it drew out the fatigue in body and spirit. Weariness loosened its grip, and a heavy drowsiness, the relief that follows deep exhaustion, came over him. With his upper body resting on the soft grass, Dewey drifted into sleep, half dreaming to the sound of an elven voice that seemed to sing and tell a story. "Wake up, Duir. Don't sleep too long. You'll catch a cold." Arwen's gentle voice roused him. Dewey opened his eyes to find her standing over him. "Arwen, why have you come?" he asked, still foggy with sleep. Come on, get out. Nimrodel eases wariness. Yes, but its water is cold. Linger, and you will freeze, she said with concern. Only then did Dewey notice Gandalf had gone. It was just him and Arwen by the river. Perhaps the Balrog's fire still lingered in him. Though the chill brushed him, it did not seem so severe. He rose without argument and waded ashore. Arwen handed him a fold of white fabric. Your clothes are ruined. These I sewed. Try them on. You made these, he asked, surprised. Arwen smiled and nodded. Dewey took the robes, caught her hand, and could not help but say, Arwen, you are too good to me. I cannot imagine how dark my life would be without you. Her lashes fluttered, and her eyes, reflecting starlight and spring water, curved with a shy smile. All right, put them on quickly. Don't catch a cold. He grinned and teased. Change here? No need to turn away? A faint blush, like morning dew on a petal, warmed her cheeks. With a small motion, she summoned a veil of mist to surround him. Stop teasing, Dewier. Change your clothes quickly. Gandalf and my grandparents are waiting. Slightly rueful, Dewey stepped into the mist and changed. When it cleared, he stood tall and lithe in an elegant white elven robe trimmed in silver, noble and graceful. How is it? Does it suit me? He asked, twirling. Arwen's eyes shone and she nodded. It looks wonderful. It suits you. They walked from the river through the Malorn groves to the ladies' garden. Gandalf, Galadriel, and Celeborn rose from their wicker chairs and watched as the young pair entered hand in hand. Gandalf chuckled and teased. I thought you two would be later yet. Young folk have an inexhaustible vitality, unlike an old man like myself. Dewey and Arwen both flushed with embarrassment. When they joined the garden tea, the conversation turned naturally to the Balrog. Gandalf recounted the battle, the fall into the abyss, the long struggle pursuing the Balrog from the deep up to the peak. Inevitably, he spoke of the nameless things in the chasm. At the recollection of that life-and-death ordeal, Arwen gripped Dewey's hand, fear and relief mingling on her face. Celeborn's attention was caught by Gandalf's mention of those nameless things. He leaned forward, surprised. I thought such tales were legend. Such creatures truly dwell beneath the earth? Gandalf's expression grew grave. I believed that too once, but meeting them proved the legends true. I would not wish to dwell on it and bring you needless dread. But were it not for the Balrog leading the way, Dewey and I might have been driven into a far worse fate. In truth, the Balrog saved our lives. Dew nodded in agreement. The memory of being met by those nameless eyes, a feeling of utter nothingness, of absolute dark despair, sent a chill through him. He had never seen the creature's form, yet the fear it inspired was far greater than that of the Balrog. It felt like a primeval terror without name. What are those nameless things? Why frighten they you so? Arwen asked. She had not heard the old legends of the deep. Galadriel rose and came to the water mirror beside her. With a gentle touch, she stirred the surface and, slowly, spoke. They are ancient, mysterious beings, far older than orcs and older even than Balrogs. They were present when Arda first took shape. Under her fingertips, the mirror flashed with fractured images, elusive and dreamlike. Then the surface blackened. The black was viscous and dense, deeper than the night above, without shadow or light. From the glass came a pressing sense of dread, a chill whispering as if some old and nameless thing slumbered there. Galadriel's gaze met that well of black as if she were looking into it, meeting an intelligence within. Just as the darkness seemed to stir, she swept her hand and the image vanished. The mirror cleared back to rippling water. Was that the thing from the deep earth? Arwen asked, trembling. Galadriel nodded. There are existences not made but simply being, such as Arwine Ben-Adar, known to some as Tom Bombadil, and the fell spirit Ungoliant, born from the void that lay about Arda. The nameless things that brood in the heart of the earth are of that same ilk. Old songs say that in the deepest shadows unspeakable things are nurtured. They gnaw at the roots of the world. If the music of the Ainur should ever end, these things might burst forth and devour all. She smiled then and reached to touch Arwen's cheek. You need not worry. The end of days is so distant that even an elf's long life cannot encompass it. Perhaps by then the elves themselves will be no more. Dewey, for his part, accepted the terrible picture with a kind of resigned understanding. These nameless things were like Norse Nidhugr gnawing the world tree's roots, or the Leviathan of other tales, embodiments of an ending. That such a theme existed in Middle-earth surprised him, but it seemed fitting. The weight of the subject made further discussion of it uneasy, and conversation soon shifted back to the Balrog. Dewey took from his cloak the Balrog's heart, a red crystal that pulsed with heat. Set on the table, it gave off a fierce radiance, and within it black flames writhed, carrying an aura that was violent, destructive, dark, and malevolent. All present felt the terrifying power contained within it. As a fallen Maya, the Balrog had once been a minor fire spirit. Seduced by Morgoth, his sacred fire was blackened and turned to evil flame. Even so, the essence of that fire remained potent. Dewey, do you mean to use the Balrog's unquenchable flame to forge the Phoenix's nirvana fire? Galadriel asked. Dewey answered quietly that this was his plan. The Balrog's fire was divine in origin. If it could be cleansed and transformed into nirvana fire, his animagus, when it evolved into a phoenix, would be far more powerful than the phoenixes of the Harry Potter world. Celeborn frowned. Yet, if you use such tainted flame, you might be drawn into darkness or become an evil thing yourself. Gandalf smiled and explained, the Balrog was once a Maya of fire. Morgoth corrupted his flame, twisting it into something evil. If the corrupting element can be purified and the fire returned to its purest nature, then it may be used to forge an immortal phoenix. He paused and looked to Galadriel. Lady Galadriel, there is no power of cleansing like yours. Will you help us purify the Balrog's fire? Galadriel studied the red crystal, then looked at Dewey and Arwen, who watched her with anxious hope. She smiled and inclined her head. I will do as you ask. Chapter 172, Return to Moria. After Galadriel agreed to help purify the Balrog's fire, she reached out and lifted the red magic crystal from the table. The crystal radiated incredible heat, yet she showed no sign of being affected. Carrying it, she walked to the central fountain, followed by Dewey and the others. At the fountain, she set the crystal where a crystal vial normally sat, the vial used to capture the light of Arendil, and so to collect the Arendil's light, the very phial of Galadriel. When night fell and Arendil's star streaked across the sky, its light would shine into the fountain, be reflected by the water, and Galadriel would capture that light in the vial. She placed the red magic crystal where the vial had been, then slowly tilted the vial to let the condensed starlight drip onto the crystal. The two met with a sizzling sound, like water on hot iron. Arendil's light is the last spark of the two trees' radiance. Galadriel said slowly, it has the power to purify all darkness and evil, perfect for purifying the Balrog's fire. Wisps of corrupt aura drifted from the Balrog's crystal and were drawn into the starlight, being purified. But the stardew itself was neutralized in the process, its volume diminishing. Dewey understood immediately the price being paid. Arendil's light was not easy to gather. In the best of nights, only a single wisp of starlight could be collected in the fountain, and it took roughly a year of such gathering to condense a single drop of stardew. A whole bottle required centuries, perhaps 1,000 years of gathering. As the stardew was consumed, the dark red crystal faded into pale red. Seeing the vial's contents fall low, Dewey hurriedly produced his own bottle. My lady, please use my bottle of Arendil's light. Galadriel shook her head. It is enough. Arendil's light purifies the crystal, but it cannot wholly remove Morgoth's corruption. For the Balrog's fire to return to its pure state will take time. She dipped her right hand into the fountain and slowly stirred. The light of Narya, the ring of water, on her finger shimmered in the water. A potent force flowed into the pool and set it sparkling with silver, as if sprinklings of starlight had fallen into the spring. Immersed in that water, the restless, scorching black flames of the crystal calmed, and its emitted heat decreased. The flames faded at a rate almost imperceptible to the eye, and the evil aura waned. From today, I will regularly infuse the spring with purifying power until the flame imperishable is restored to purity, Galadriel said, withdrawing her hand. How long will that take? Dewey asked. Not long, she replied. About 3 years should be sufficient. 3 years, Dewey blurted. For elves, 3 years is nothing. For a mortal like him, it was a long stretch. He could wait for the Phoenix Animagus, he thought, but he could not remain idle. His research into the Philosopher's Stone would have to accelerate. He left the crystal to purify in the fountain and stayed in Lorien to recuperate. It took a full month for the exhaustion of magic and the fatigue of the soul to finally dissipate. During his recovery, Dewey remade 3 flying broomsticks. His and Gandalf's had been burned in the fight with the Balrog. This time, he used melon tree branches. The new brooms performed better and flew faster. He named them Firebolt, Comet, and another Firebolt, keeping one for himself, one for Arwen, and one for Gandalf. Just as he settled into Lorien life, a raven arrived with a letter from Moria. Dewey opened it while thinking that perhaps he should recruit owls as messengers as well. The letter came from Balin. Moria had been fully reclaimed. Some orcs had been slain in battle. Others fled to the west gate and were burned to ash by Smaug, the dragon guarding outside that gate. None escaped. Balin, now Lord of Moria, formally invited Dewey and Gandalf to be his guests. Gandalf received the same invitation. Celeborn and Galadriel were also invited. Naturally, Dewey and Gandalf would not refuse, but Celeborn declined. Because the dwarves had once coveted the Silmaril and were responsible for the death of his great-uncle King Thingol and the ruin of Doriath, he had long distrusted dwarves. He had even refused to enter Moria himself, waiting until Eregion fell before crossing the Misty Mountains to join Galadriel in Lorien. Still, Celeborn could not offend the dwarves who controlled the mithril mines, so he prepared a gift. Galadriel stood with her husband and did not go. Arwen, at Dewey's invitation and representing Lorien, accompanied him to Moria to attend the dwarves' feast. They left Lorien, followed the celebrant upstream, and arrived at Moria's east gate in Dimril Dale. Balin himself greeted them at the gate. "Welcome, Gandalf, Dewey, and fair elf lady, welcome to Moria." Balin was in high spirits, embracing Dewey and Gandalf warmly and insisting they enter. They were led into the first hall. Moria's halls were vast. From east gate to west gate, if one walked straight without losing the way, it still took 3 to 4 days. So Balin had made the first hall the main living and feast area. The dwarven feast was loud and lavish. Dewey admired the mithril-crafted cutlery, cups, and utensils before him in secret. A small piece of mithril was worth untold wealth in trade, and entire objects of mithril were priceless. Thorin's mithril coat for Bilbo could buy the Shire. Here, though, mithril tableware was treated as commonplace. Armor and weapons of the dwarven warriors and various vessels were all mithril, relics of the old kingdom of Khazad-dûm, newly reclaimed by Balin and his folk, brought out for guests. Arwen sat beside Dewey, also surprised by the extravagance. As a Noldor princess, she had learned forging techniques from her grandmother Galadriel and knew the value of mithril. Even Narya, the ring of water on Galadriel's hand, had its main ring made from mithril. Some great elven blades were enhanced with mithril to make them sharper, lighter, and subtly enchanted. She had not expected them to use mithril so freely for tableware. Even more surprisingly, Balin had dwarf warriors bring over a dozen large iron chests and set them before Dewey and Gandalf. "What is this?" they asked. Balin signaled the dwarves to open the chests. Inside were finished mithril goods, vessels, ornaments, crafts, and raw mithril ore. "Gandalf, Dewey, you slew the Balrog and helped us reclaim Moria," Balin said earnestly. "I cannot express my gratitude enough, but mere words will not do, so I have prepared this." He handed over 2 parchments written in Tengwar and moon letters in mithril ink. "As a token of my thanks, I grant 1/10 ownership of Moria's mithril ore to each of you, Gandalf and Dewey. I hope you will accept." Both were taken aback. Dewey remembered Balin had promised such a share before the expedition, but he had not expected the elder to fulfill his word so readily, offering the same to Gandalf, and doing so without hesitation. There was none of the greed some dwarves showed. Balin's action proved his steadiness and wisdom. Dewey gladly accepted. Mithril was of enormous use, and he needed it, and signed the contract with a silver pen provided by the dwarves. The ink was forged with mithril and special compounds so it would not fade. The parchment was made of tough giant lizard skin, steeped in preservative so it would endure for ages. The care in the preparations showed Balin's sincerity. Gandalf declined the share, but selected a mithril pipe from the chest. He joked that he had no subjects to provide for like Dewey, so such wealth would be of little use. Balin's face showed mild disappointment rather than glee. Dewey could not help but use a legilimency charm to glimpse Balin's thoughts. The gratitude was genuine. There was also a shrewd hope to bind both Dewey and Gandalf to Moria by giving them a stake in its riches. Should Moria face peril again, the two powerful wizards might be more inclined to aid it. Dewey did not mind. If anything, he admired Balin's cleverness. After presenting the mithril, Balin led them to the treasury. In the days of Khazad-dûm, mithril had made the kingdom richer than the Lonely Mountain. Even the vaulted ceiling had once been plated in gold. When the Balrog awoke and Khazad-dûm fell, orcs plundered much of the wealth and sent it to Sauron's Barad-dûr. Even the golden ceiling had been stripped away, leaving black stone. Yet what remained was still staggering. Dewey and the others stood before mountains of gold, silver, and jewels and were struck silent. This was a treasury to rival the Lonely Mountain. Chapter 174, Fire Demon's Lair. The treasury lay at Moria's lowest level, reached by a special tunnel the dwarves had carved. At the end of the tunnel stood the treasury door, forged from a blend of mithril and refined iron. This is the only intact treasury left in Moria, Balin told Dewey and Gandalf. Its defenses are the strongest. The walls on all four sides are alloyed with mithril and iron, and the door is sealed with a password only dwarves can read. That kept the orcs from tunneling in and left the hoard unplundered. Balin spoke with a quiet sorrow. Khazad-dûm had grown rich on inexhaustible veins of mithril. No single vault could hold all its wealth. When the Balrog awakened and Khazad-dûm fell, the Balrog cared nothing for treasure, but the orcs were ravenous. They plundered what they could, kept mining mithril, and shipped ore to Barad-dûr to supply Sauron's armies. Only this original treasury survived because of its formidable protections. I spent days finally unlocking the password, Balin added, his eyes brightening. Perhaps Durin's line foresaw danger and built this vault specially. There's a great deal inside. He pushed the door open and led them in. Dewey and Arwen gasped. Firelight set the chamber glittering with gold. The vault was vast, no smaller than the dwarven halls, with a massive gilded pillar at its center. The floor, walls, and ceiling were laid with gold, lavish beyond measure. Mountains of coin, gems, jewelry, and exquisite craftsmanship rose nearly to the high ceiling. The hoard rivaled the Lonely Mountains. Best of all for Dewey, half of that treasure legally belonged to him. He had only taken a tenth at the Lonely Mountain. Gandalf refused Balin's offer of wealth as always, taking only a few coins to buy Shire tobacco. Dewey had no such scruples. He slotted open his spatial bag and began filling it, half the treasury, gone in moments. He had mouths to feed at home, not least a dragon who adored gold and was waiting to build a nest. Balin watched without complaint. To him, the true wealth of Moria had never been the gold strewn in the vaults, but the mithril beneath the earth. With that mine in dwarven hands, riches would be endless. After they left the treasury, Balin asked Dewey to set up a flue network on the hearth in the first hall and offered to trade mithril for flue powder at a 1-to-1 rate. Dewey agreed at once and already schemed ways to increase flue powder production without doing it himself. Gandalf, Dewey, there is something else I hoped you might help with, Balin said, hesitating. You may not know, but the richest mithril veins are down where the Balrog's pit opened. If we are to resume mining, we cannot avoid that area. The problem is that the Balrog's presence has turned it into a land of lava and sulfurous poisonous gases. Our strength is not enough to approach it. Could you go down and see if you can deal with the danger? He finished. Dewey and Gandalf exchanged looks. If the Balrog was gone, the lava and flames should have cooled over time, unless a volcanic layer had been breached beneath. Curious and willing to help, they agreed. At the edge of the mine pit, they mounted their flying broomsticks and descended. The pit was prodigiously deep, thousands of meters down. The air grew progressively hotter as they went. At the bottom, a river of molten rock churned, belching boiling lava. A sharp, sulfurous stench hung heavy. Dewey cast a bubble-head charm over himself and Gandalf to keep out the toxic fumes, then used his staff to cast aguamenti on the lava below. A gush of water met the molten flow, steam billowing as lava and water fought. Much of the surface cooled into a silver sheen. It was molten mithril and of very high purity. Where the surface solidified, it became a silver-white mithril stream. They paid little attention to the priceless river. Their eyes were fixed on a molten conduit where even Dewey's water couldn't quench the heat. Molten mithril still spouted from that passage. Both guessed at once. This had been the Balrog's lair. The channel burned as if breathing flame. Dewey produced 2 fire protection potions. After he and Gandalf drank one each and doubled their safeguards with protective charms, they entered the molten conduit. The passage plunged deep, with lava seeping from every fissure as if it were a living volcanic throat ready to erupt. The heat, without the potions, would have incinerated the hardest metals. After a long, blistering descent, the passage opened into a vast circular cavern, the Balrog's lair. Below them, the cavern floor boiled with lava and flame. A black, unmolten rock platform rose at the center. The walls, to their astonishment, were studded with a thick layer of red translucent crystals. The whole cavern looked like a blazing geode. The crystals radiated heat and a strong fire element magic, exactly the kind of thing the Balrog would have formed and fed with its flames. It was these fire crystals that had kept the lava from cooling. "What are those?" Dewey asked, both amazed and intrigued. Gandalf examined them and smiled. Fire crystals, formed under the Balrog's influence. They would take tens of thousands of years to grow. He turned to Dewey with a pleased look. "Your luck runs strong. Fire crystals are rarer than mithril. They can be worked into fire attribute weapons and can grant resistance or immunity to fire. They're an exceptional magical material." "Our luck indeed," Dewey grinned. Gandalf shook his head with a small smile. "Chip off a little for me to use as tinder. I don't need more than that. Take the rest." Dewey did not resist. He set to work with his spear, eggless, prying crystals from the wall, and carefully placed them into a mithril box warded with an undetectable extension charm. The fire crystals were blistering to touch. Even with the fire protection potion, Dewey felt them burn his hands. Ordinary metal or stone would have melted or cracked under their heat. Only mithril could contain them without damage. Gandalf, curious, borrowed Dewey's flame sword and helped him extract the crystals. When at last they had removed every crystal from the cavern and sealed them in the mithril boxes, the cavern's temperature fell noticeably, though noticeably still meant dangerously hot. Without the crystals, the heat would continue to subside over years until the lava cooled and the molten mithril solidified, but left alone that would take decades to a century. Since they had promised to help, Gandalf and Dewey did not leave it to time. Together, they cast powerful ice charms and began to freeze the molten channels. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the rivers of lava solidified into bright mithril rock. They only stopped when the flows were completely stilled. Gandalf picked up a small fire crystal, and intending to use it as flint for his pipe, touched it lightly. The crystal's blistering heat vanished under his finger, where his finger bore the ring of fire, and it calmed into a deep red gem. He slipped it into his pocket and warned Dewey, "These crystals were born of the Balrog and carry its taint. When you return, be sure to purify that evil." "How do I do that?" Dewey asked. "The simplest way is exposure to direct sunlight. It will slowly cleanse the corruption. Using the light of Arendelle will speed the process. Using both together is best." "I understand. Thank you, Gandalf," Dewey said, nodding. Chapter 174, Mother of Mithril. After harvesting the flame crystals from the Balrog's lair and quenching the magma, Dewey looked around. His gaze settled on a large black stone platform at the very center. The great slab was scorched and furred with deep claw marks, clearly the Balrog's seat. "Gandalf, do you think this stone hides something? How could it not have melted in the Balrog's fire?" Dewey asked as he approached. Gandalf, who had noticed it long ago, nodded. "Even mithril would not survive the Balrog's heat unscathed. For this to remain is extraordinary." He tapped the black stone with his staff, calling a little bit of magic. Cracks spidered across the surface, and the black outer layer peeled away like scorched shell, revealing a shimmering silver core. The dark skin had been a shell of cooled magma. Beneath it, the stone gleamed with a soft inner light. Dewey stepped closer, fascinated. Gandalf's face brightened with awe. He struck the stone again with more force. With the impact, the remaining crust shattered and fell away, revealing a 2-person-tall ingot of silver-white ore. Its surface flowed with a gentle metallic glow, like the heart of a star lighting the cavern. "Is that mithril?" Dewey asked, puzzled. Mithril could reflect silver light, he knew, but it did not usually glow from within. Gandalf's voice was reverent. "Not ordinary mithril. This is the Mother of Mithril." The Mother of Mithril. Dewey had never heard the name and blinked in confusion. Gandalf ran his hand over the radiant surface. It is the heart of Moria, the source from which all Mithril there was born. As long as it endures, Mithril will be born in Moria. He shook his head in wonder. The Balrog's flames did not destroy it. They have in fact refined it, poured their energy into it. This is more valuable than the entire Mithril workings of Moria. Dewey's eyes lit up. The Mother of Mithril sounded far more extraordinary than ordinary Mithril. If I take a few fragments, he asked, will that harm it? Take only a few pieces, Gandalf said. It is the foundation of Moria. We must not be greedy. Dewey used the divine spear Aeglos to pry a fist-sized chunk from the surface. He managed to remove 3 pieces before Gandalf stopped him. No more, the wizard warned. If we strip too much, the Mother will be damaged. If the Mithril fields of Moria dry up because of us, that would be a grievous sin. Dewey did not press the matter. He kept 1 fragment, handed 1 to Gandalf, and intended to give the 3rd to Balin. Gandalf accepted his piece, but frowned at Dewey's plan to tell Balin. The Mother of Mithril is extraordinary, Gandalf said. Even Balin, wise as he is, would find it hard to remain dispassionate. The Arkenstone once drew Thorin's kin into ruin. Once dwarves learn of such a thing, even from a place of safety and pride, they may become obsessed with possessing and protecting it. That obsession could bring disaster to the Mother itself, and might even drain Moria's Mithril. Dew considered Gandalf's words. He knew human and dwarven nature all too well. The Mother of Mithril was the lifeblood of an entire realm. Even Balin, wanting only to preserve it, would almost certainly pursue it single-mindedly and try to secure it for his people. Such a chain of events had been repeated many times in Middle-earth. Then keep the last piece, Gandalf advised. But hide it well, bury it near a mine by Weathertop, and leave it deep with a few flame crystals. The Mother can slowly radiate, converting nearby ore into Mithril over time. Dewey's interest was immediate. It can really do that? Gandalf smiled. It radiates. In the right conditions, it will slowly transform ordinary metal veins into Mithril or allow existing Mithril seams to grow. The rate is slow, perhaps only a gram per year, but over centuries it will replenish the mines. It also draws and stabilizes magical energies, which benefits the surroundings. Dewey remembered the small iron vein the dwarves had found at the foot of Weathertop when they built Hogwarts Castle. At the time, no one thought it worth mining. Now it would serve perfectly. With Gandalf's urging, Dewey accepted the remaining fragment. All right, then, Gandalf said. We must finish this properly. If the Mother remains exposed, the dwarves will surely uncover it. Dewyer, help me hide it so no one can find it. Gandalf's eyes gleamed with resolve. Only if it stays undiscovered can it quietly produce Mithril for the future. He raised his staff and began to chant an ancient spell. Dewey produced his wand and traced runes on the Mother fragment, weaving disillusionment charms, confundus, and other magics around it. He even placed a Fidelius-type concealment on its secret and location. Confident that no simple search could reveal it, Gandalf slammed his staff to the stone floor. The earth trembled. A fissure tore open beneath them, a bottomless crack. The Mother of Mithril toppled into the abyss, and the chasm closed as if it had never been. Gandalf breathed and wiped his brow, smiling. There. That should keep it safe. Now we should go. Balin will be worried, Dewey said. They left the Balrog's lair, returned along the lava tunnel to the lower parts of the mine, and Gandalf sealed the chamber behind them to remove all traces of the Mother. Then they mounted their flying broomsticks and rose to the cliff edge where Balin and Arwen waited. Balin exhaled in relief at their return. Arwen glided forward, concern in her face as she looked Dewey over. Dewey, are you all right? She asked. Dewey softened and smiled. I'm fine, don't worry. Balin turned to Gandalf. How are things below? Gandalf laughed. The magma was only residual power from the Balrog. Dewey and I have dealt with it. The molten rock cooled and solidified. You need not fear further eruptions. Balin visibly relaxed. That is wonderful news. Thank you, both of you. Truly, I don't know what we would have done without you. Dewey added with a grin. There's more good news. The cooled magma turned into very high-purity mithril. You won't need to dig for it. You can smelt it directly. Balin's eyes shone. Really? That is excellent. With that worry lifted, Balin hosted another feast. 2 days later, Dewey, Gandalf, and Arwen took their leave. Dewey chose to depart through the west gate. He escorted Arwen to the first hall's enchanted fireplace and sent her back to Lorien. Gandalf did not go to Lorien. Instead, he rode east on his broom toward Fangorn Forest. Having cut off one of Saruman's allies and scattered orcs in Moria, Gandalf suspected Saruman might act sooner than expected. He planned to watch the traitor's moves through the Ents. Dewey left by the west gate to meet Smaug, who guarded that approach. He still had an unchecked check-in location. Mounting the great dragon, Dewey asked Smaug to pause briefly at the ruins of Eregion. The dragon eyed him curiously, then hovered. Dewey leaped down, his feet landing where the rings of power had once been forged. A moment later, a system prompt chimed in his mind. Hogwarts sign-in system. Location Eregion. Do you wish to sign in? Sign in, Dewey replied. Sign in successful. Congratulations on obtaining Goblin Forging Craftsmanship. 176. Fairycraft. Chapter 175. Goblin Craftsmanship. Goblin Forging Craftsmanship? Dewey was stunned for a moment, then, after a careful inspection, a pleased look spread across his face. In the wizarding world, goblins were a highly intelligent, culturally distinct magical race, shrewd and cunning, the managers of the wizard bank. They were also unmatched craftsmen, able to forge artifacts infused with powerful magic. Their craftsmanship surpassed that of most wizards. The Sword of Gryffindor, forged by goblins, could absorb magical substances beneficial to it, like basilisk venom, and thus gain the power to destroy Horcruxes. Goblin smiths in this world were the equivalent of Middle-earth's elven and dwarf smiths. More importantly, goblin-crafted weapons had an advantage the elves and dwarves' work lacked. They could grow. Over time, they absorbed magical substances and became stronger, resisting deterioration or loss of power. If Dewey mastered goblin forging, he could join the ranks of the world's three master smiths, alongside the elves and the dwarves. Compared to the dwarves' obsession with indestructibility and the elves' emphasis on magical resonance, goblin forging offered something different: growth. Who wouldn't want a weapon that grew with them? Even more surprisingly, Dewey's sign-in reward had increased his sensitivity to both metal and magic. Holding a block of mithril, he could perceive its magical potential and understand how to maximize it. His attunement to magic let him detect the fluctuations of enchanted artifacts. Dewey was thrilled with such a windfall. He climbed onto Smaug's back, patted the great dragon, and said, "Let's go back to Weathertop, Hogwarts Castle." Smaug beat his massive wings, leapt into the sky, and carried him toward Weathertop. Hogsmeade at the mountain's foot was bright and busy that day. The once small village had grown into a town of tens of thousands. Calling it a city wouldn't be an exaggeration, and it still spread along the east-west road. The fields outside crisscrossed with grain and vegetables. People came and went, faces bright and lively. They had come from all over Eriador, some even from the bitter northern lands, seeking refuge or opportunity. Traveling merchants, tourists, adventurers, and bards stopped here as well. Bards stood by the Black Lake, gazing at the distant, imposing castle of Weathertop and singing its praises beneath the two golden and silver trees that had become its symbols. Merchants traded daily necessities and handicrafts with town residents who, freed from heavy taxation, spent liberally. These traders returned home with good profits. Seeing Hogsmeade prosper, Mr. Buttercup of the Prancing Pony and Bree had opened a branch here, turning it over to his son. Since Bree had also come under Dewey's rule, ties between the towns had tightened. Exchanges between their residents grew more frequent. Aside from a little rivalry between the two mayors, townspeople considered themselves Dewey's subjects without distinction, even intermarrying. Bree, positioned at the junction of the east-west and north-south roads, retained its importance as a transport hub. After Dewey drained the dark magic of the Barrow Downs to nurture the basilisk, the whites there were no longer a threat. Bree and the Shire saw more contact, and many hobbits from the western regions arrived in Bree to work in the Prancing Pony or trade Shire goods, tobacco, wine, and agricultural produce. Most of these hobbits hailed from adventurous families like the Tooks or Brandybucks. On this particular day, Hogsmeade bustled as usual. A painter, having admired the castle from afar, set up his easel to capture the Weathertop view. Suddenly, the clear sky darkened. The painter looked up in confusion and saw a colossal creature overhead. He turned pale, dropped his brush, and fell to his knees, crying, "Dragon! A dragon!" Outsiders looked up and, seeing a dragon for the first time, panicked and scrambled for cover. The townsfolk, however, cheered and waved excitedly. "Lord Dewey is back!" they shouted. They knew their lord had left on a long journey with his dragon a month earlier. The return of the dragon meant Dewey had returned. The locals felt proud rather than afraid. Smaug was their lord's mount and their symbol of strength. The outsiders, seeing their calm excitement, exchanged uneasy looks. Rumors had said the Lord of Weathertop had a dragon. Seeing Smaug in the sky made that rumor real and terrifying. High above, Dewey noticed the cheering below and smiled. The welcome home felt wonderful. Smaug responded with a triumphant roar and ferried him back to Weathertop, landing on the castle's great lawn. Edward the butler had heard the commotion and hurried over, bowing with joy. "My lord, welcome back." Dewey dismounted, smiled, and waved him off. "No formalities, Edward. Did anything happen while I was away?" "No, my lord," Edward replied respectfully. "Besides regular reports from Mayor Luke and Mayor Lucky, nothing of consequence." "That's good," Dewey nodded. At Smaug's prompting, Dewey went down to the cellar after Edward left. He measured the space and sighed. "I'll have to expand this. It won't hold everything." He cast the undetectable extension charm again, doubling the cellar's size. Then, with Smaug peering on eagerly, he emptied half the treasure he had brought from Moria into the vault. Gold, jewels, and jade cascaded out like a river, clattering and piling higher and higher. Smaug's eyes gleamed. Hearing the coins clink, he rolled ecstatically through the pile. Dewey kept out of the dragon's way. Treating treasure as food wasn't very practical, and wondered if Morgoth had made dragons with shaky sense, giving them such a stupid obsession. Moria's hoard rivaled the Lonely Mountains. Even a tenth of the Lonely Mountains' treasure couldn't match half of Moria's. With these additions, Smaug could finally bury himself in riches. But he wasn't satisfied. He fixed burning eyes on Dewey. "Master, bring out the mithril. I know those dwarves gave you mithril. I can smell it." Mithril was worth more than gold, so Smaug coveted it. Dewey rolled his eyes. "Are you a dog?" He produced a dozen boxes of mithril artifacts and ore Balin had given him. Smaug brightened and swept them to his side with his tail, guarding them like the most precious spoil. Then he leaned in toward Dewey, hoping for more. Dewey pushed his head away. "Not a chance. I've got plans for the rest. You're not getting all of it." Smaug, seeing that Dewey was resolute, withdrew his head with a disappointed huff, buried himself in the gold, and went to sleep. Dewey smirked at the dragon's simple-mindedness and left the cellar. He returned the serpent Heilbo from the space box to the Chamber of Secrets. Heilbo had taken great strain in the fight with the Balrog. Even his scales had been singed. He needed time to recover, but the chamber had plenty of giant spider food, enough to nurse him back to health. Only the enormous petrified statue of the Watcher in the water remained, turned to stone by the basilisk's gaze. Ordinary spells couldn't reverse that. It would take a potion made from mandrake to restore it. Dewey left the statue in the space box until he could brew the remedy. Next, he went to the laboratory and retrieved the Balrog's body. The massive, charred remains were twisted and blackened, reeking faintly of sulfur, but Dewey's eyes shone. This was the corpse of a Maya, even a fallen Maya, a demigod-level being, rich in research value. In the Balrog's chest, he found red crystal shards left when the divine spear Aeglos had pierced its heart. Dewey collected every fragment, stored them carefully in a crystal vial, and planned to experiment with them later. He wouldn't waste a single scrap of such precious material. Chapter 177, Fire Creatures. Dewey opened the mithril box that held the fire crystals. A wave of heat rushed out the moment the lid moved. The crystals glowed like molten embers, pouring such intense heat into the box's interior that the air inside shimmered and warped. Feeling the temperature spike, Dewey snapped the lid shut. The forged mithril was mercifully heat-resistant. Any other metal or stone would have long since melted. Before closing the box fully, Dewey slipped a small piece of fire crystal out. It was no larger than a baby's fist, yet it gave off temperatures of several thousand degrees. The laboratory instantly felt like midsummer. He set the shard on an iron block. The iron burned straight through. He tried thick stone bricks next. They cracked and softened into molten rock. Finally, more out of curiosity than expectation, he set the crystal on the body of the dead Balrog. To his astonishment, the Balrog's form, cold, hard, stone-like since death, especially after its magic crystal was removed, did not burn. Instead, the area in contact with the fire crystal softened and became elastic, as though some dormant activity were being restored. Dewey's eyes lit up. This reaction was beyond anything he'd expected. The activated section of the Balrog's body made it far better for study. Unable to restrain his curiosity, he reopened the mithril box, used his wand to double its internal space, and placed the Balrog's body inside. The fire crystals poured out heat powerful enough to melt the hardest metals, yet the Balrog did not incinerate. Its body continued to regain activity. Flames kindled around it as if it were coming back to life. He felt a jolt of alarm, then relief when it was clear the Balrog hadn't fully revived. Satisfied that the creature would remain contained, Dewey left it sealed with the fire crystals. After all, a Balrog is essentially an elemental form condensed from fire and shadow. Left dead too long, its fire dissipates and it becomes worthless stone. Preserving it in the fire crystals was a lucky find. From a wound in the Balrog's chest, a dark, magma-like blood flowed. Dewey collected it in another mithril bottle and added a grain-sized fire crystal to prevent it re-solidifying. He stared at the viscous fluid, heartened by the possibilities. Divine blood, what would it do? He set up experiments. First, he injected small amounts into ordinary birds, reptiles, lizards, snakes, and even some captured orc, warg, and troll specimens. The results were brutal. Bodies burned to ash or exploded. Those creatures simply couldn't tolerate the magma-like heat. Then Dewey remembered a bottle of Balrog heart fragments he'd taken earlier. He tried again. This time, he selected a common lizard and implanted a dust-sized fragment of the crystal into its heart, then watched. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Dewey even wondered if the shard was too small to matter. Gradually, though, the lizard's skin flushed red, and its cold-blooded body grew scalding. Seeing that, Dewey injected a single drop of Balrog blood. The lizard writhed violently, rolling in pain until it seemed near death, and then its whole body flared into flames. Expecting ashes, Dewey was stunned when the lizard sprang from the table and dove into a nearby fireplace. Rather than burn, it transformed in the flames. Its scales became iridescent, fire danced along its body, and it radiated a faint magical aura. It stayed in the hearth, clearly comfortable, embers crackling off it like a living ember. Dewey realized, with delighted surprise, that his ordinary lizard had become a magic creature. The transformed lizard remembered him, tensing and so much as flicking a little spark in his direction. Dewey waved a hand to ward off the tiny flame and laughed. "You're a touch vengeful, aren't you, little one?" He hooked a finger and levitated the fire lizard out of the flames to bring it back to the table for study. Almost immediately, the creature went limp, its blaze guttered, and it grew weak. Dewey hurriedly returned it to the hearth and watched it revive. After repeating this several times, he confirmed the truth. The fire lizard could not live away from open flame. The longer it was removed, the weaker it became, until it would die. That limitation was manageable. Dewey conjured a controlled flame to wrap the lizard, carrying it to the table without letting its fire die. He examined it with his wand and confirmed what he suspected, a fire-bound magical lizard. Its offensive power was modest. It spat only small jets of flame that an ordinary person could extinguish. Still, accidentally creating a new magic creature thrilled him. He drew a small sample of its blood with a syringe and returned the lizard to the hearth. There was only one, so Dewey made another by the same method, implanting a Balrog heart fragment and injecting Balrog blood into a second lizard. The pair soon began interacting in the flames, and to Dewey's surprise, mated. He watched with a mix of embarrassment and anticipation. If they could reproduce, his work wouldn't be wasted. That settled, he left the two fire lizards to their business and moved on. After all, they would die if they wandered away from flame, so they were safe enough to ignore for a while. Next, he turned his attention to a venomous snake. The snake recoiled under his gaze and took an aggressive posture, but its mouth hissed Parseltongue that Dewey, to his own surprise, could understand. "Human, don't come closer. I'm dangerous. Leave me alone." Dewey grinned and spoke back in Parseltongue. "You could be stronger. You won't live long like this. Don't you want more power and more time?" He waved the two fiery lizards in the snake's direction as proof. The simple-minded snake fixated on the promise of power, and before it could fully consider the consequences, it had been immobilized for the procedure. This time, Dewey used a larger crystal fragment, embedding it into the snake's heart and following with Balrog blood. The snake writhed on the table. Its body swelled, and fine cracks crawled over its skin, revealing a molten red beneath. It began to cry out, its voice a hissing plea, "Fire! I need fire!" Dewey summoned a column of flame. Enveloped in it, the snake inhaled and absorbed the heat as if it had been starved for a lifetime. Its old skin was consumed, replaced by new scales that were ash-white, and its eyes glowed like embers. He asked the newly formed fire snake what it could do. Tentatively, it answered, "I think I can make my body explode, generating extreme heat to burn enemies, and my venom seems different now." Dewey raised an eyebrow. To test, the snake bit a mouse. The rodent let out one terrible cry. Then it combusted from the inside outward, reduced to a pile of ash. Dewey's eyes brightened. The fire snake's abilities were lethal in more ways than one. "There's one more thing," the snake added shyly. "What?" Dewey asked, curious. "I'm about to give birth," it admitted. Dewey stared. "You were pregnant?" The snake twisted awkwardly. "Yes, I had one encounter with a handsome male. I didn't expect this. It's my first time." Dewey couldn't believe his luck. He'd stumbled upon a pregnant specimen. Like the fire lizard, the fire snake now required flames to survive, though it was less dependent. It could remain away from flame for about an hour before weakening, needing a cooler place to lay its eggs. Otherwise, they would explode in the fire. The snake crawled to a dark corner away from open flame and strained. One by one, it produced 7 eggs. Each was red and emitted intense heat. The snake explained that it couldn't lay them in the hearth. If it did, the eggs would detonate like bombs. The mother had to place the eggs somewhere cool and return to the flames within an hour, or she would die. Chapter 178. Pet Kraken Dewey carefully moved the 7 snake eggs the fire snake had just laid onto the experimental table. They radiated intense heat. One careless move, and they could explode, setting the room alight. The mother snake, having finished laying, crawled back into the flames without looking back, as if her duty were done and she now needed to recover. Dewey felt a twinge of helplessness. He had made himself a problem. The fire salamanders couldn't leave the fire, and so posed little risk. But this fire snake could wander for an hour and lay scorching eggs, turning it into a mobile source of fire. If he weren't careful, the creature could burn down the castle he'd built. And yet now that the eggs existed, he couldn't simply destroy them. He put a freezing charm on one egg to put it into dormancy and study it later. These eggs reminded him of Ashwinder eggs from the magical world, a rare potion ingredient used in love potions, defensive draughts like Eldris potions, Felix Felicis, and more. He wanted to see whether these could be a substitute. The other 6 eggs spontaneously ignited. From the flames hatched 6 slender, grayish-white snakes. After devouring the fire that birthed them, they instinctively slithered toward the nearest source of heat, leaving trails of ash in their wake. 3 crawled back to the mother and settled in the blaze, only to be greeted with bared fangs. The mother showed no maternal instinct. She drove them off as if they were intruders. The other 3 snakes immediately took over the fire salamander's hearth, interrupting the salamander's mating and forcing them to the flame's edge in pitiful little clusters. The newborn snakes snarled at one another, each trying to claim a fireplace. Dewey rubbed his temples. He quickly conjured 6 small flames and assigned them to the hatchlings so they wouldn't kill one another. He decided he'd have to keep them in a dedicated, enclosed space. If these snakes roamed freely, his castle and the village of Hogsmeade below could be in real danger. He found an empty, non-flammable room, expanded it with an undetectable extension charm, cut a dozen small fireplaces into the surrounding walls, and lit them. He placed the mother snake and the 6 hatchlings there. The 2 fire salamanders, being less dangerous and dependent on the flames, were left in their fireplace as living decorations for the castle hearth. After the experiments with the Balrog heart fragments and Balrog blood, Dewey stopped. The heart fragments had turned ordinary lizards and snakes into magical creatures. The Balrog blood had acted as a catalyst. Both were scarce. He couldn't squander them on animal experiments. He shelved the project for now and turned to another matter that had been waiting since his return: the petrified water watcher. Leaving the giant octopus in the spatial box wasn't a permanent option. He needed a restorative potion to reverse the petrification and then subdue it. Dewey went up to the herbology floor to the room of King's grass. Warm, humid air greeted him. The chamber was its own little world, with an impossibly blue ceiling, drifting clouds, and sunlight. Rolling hills spread over the floor. A stream wound through them into a clear lake, and what had once been a few King's grass plants now carpeted the ground like weeds, all flowering white and filling the air with a sweet fragrance. Some King's grass had been transplanted into the garden earlier. With the white tree there, they thrived even in Weathertop's unfavorable conditions. Dewey allowed Edward, his butler, to harvest it when villagers needed serious remedies. But today, the plants weren't his focus. At the lake, Goldberry's water lilies, gifts from Tom and the Withywindle, breathed powerful healing magic into the water. On the opposite shore, a ring of broad-leaved plants rustled. When they sensed him, most fell silent and still. A few uprooted and scurried away on tiny feet. Mandrakes. Dewey singled out the fastest-running mandrake, summoned it, and held it up. It twisted and shrieked, but he'd already cast a silencing charm. He drew a syringe and extracted green sap until he had enough, then tossed the wilted, sobbing mandrake back to the ground. According to the restorative potion recipe, a whole mandrake root was ideal, but using Professor Snape's notes as a guide and thinking of sustainability, he chose to extract sap instead. The mandrake scurried off and buried itself. Dewey left it be and headed to the potions classroom. Days later, the restorative potion was done. Using Snape's notes, the brew had succeeded on the first try and was perfect. He bottled several vials, set one aside for the Water Watcher, and stored the rest in the potions cabinet. A restorative potion could reverse petrification, transfiguration, and many dark curses. It was wise to keep extras. Dewey carried a bottle to the room with the spatial box that held the Water Watcher. He opened the box, looked at the enormous, stone-like octopus, and poured the whole vial into its cavernous mouth. The petrified gray began to shift back to dark green. Rigid tentacles flexed and curled. Even the limbs severed by a Sectum Sempra curse was freed from the residual dark arts and began to regrow. The Water Watcher awoke, saw Dewey, and lashed out furiously with gigantic tentacles. Dewey's face remained calm. With a flick of his wand, he unleashed controlled fiend fire. The flame erupted, incinerating the incoming tentacles to ash and spreading through the box until it became a world of living fire. Dewey stood in the center without feeling harmed. The fiend fire flowed around him obediently, making him look like a king in a ring of flame. The Water Watcher, however, was engulfed and screamed in agony. Dewey kept the fire tightly managed. If he'd wanted, the creature would already be ash, but he let the heat buffet it, roasting it to the brink of death without leaving external burns. When the Water Watcher teetered on the edge, Dewey eased the flames back just enough to keep it alive, but terrified. "I know you understand me," he said coldly. "I can overlook what you did before, but you must obey me. If you don't, these flames will burn you slowly, first your tentacles, then your skin, your organs, your bones, then your mind." He let the fiend fire form nightmarish shapes, giant dragons, basilisks, balrogs, eyes gleaming and ready to pounce. The Water Watcher retracted its tentacles and stared at the flames in terror. Instinct and fear fought indecision. When the fire drew close, it frantically nodded, submitting to survive. The fiend fire then withdrew, reluctantly as if it regretted the meal it couldn't have. Dewey plucked a drop of blue blood from the octopus and a drop of his own blood, then cast a binding spell. The two drops merged into a red and blue bead, which he slipped into the octopus's mouth. The bead flowed into its vessels and became an invisible, unbreakable restraint, a blood-binding oath, a variation of the one he had used on the basilisk. From that moment, the creature would be forced to obey him and could not harm him. He dispelled the fiend fire. "From today on," he told it, "you are no longer the Water Watcher. You are my pet, Kraken." The great octopus bowed obediently, showing complete submission. Chapter 178, The Forging Furnace. With the great octopus subdued, it could not stay cramped in the box. Dewey left the box behind, mounted his flying broom, and carried the container down to the Black Lake at the mountain's foot. He opened it and released the creature. At sight of the water, the Kraken, Truly, a great octopus became ecstatic, like a thirsty man finding an oasis. With Duir's permission, it plunged into the lake. Water was its life. Nourished by the lake, it quickly regained vigor, and its severed tentacles grew back in short order. It flailed 24 thick, powerful arms, churning the surface and raising massive waves. The kraken's immense bulk, nearly as large as the dragon Smaug, caused a commotion that drew the attention of Hogsmeade across the shore. People were startled at the sight, but someone soon recognized Duir. Seeing that the beast acknowledged him, the villagers relaxed. After all, their lord already kept a dragon, a giant eagle, and a huge serpent. Another monstrous pet was not so strange now. Duir noticed the attention and called to the kraken, "Do not attack the people on the far shore. Understood?" The kraken nodded. It could not speak, but its intelligence matched that of a human. It understood that Duir meant the townsfolk well and would not disobey. Hooves sounded, and Mayor Luke arrived, hastily riding a well-bred horse. The creature's presence kept the mount at a respectful distance, so the mayor dismounted and hurried over. He regarded the octopus with some trepidation, but bowed before Duir. "Lord Duir, hear about the octopus?" Duir asked. "Yes, my lord. Will it live in the lake from now on?" Duir nodded. "Yes, it will be a guardian for the lake. Under my command, it will not molest the people of Hogsmeade. Everything will remain as before." Luke relaxed but hesitated. "Some of the townsfolk fish the lake extensively. Will that be a problem?" Duir waved him off. "Half the lake, the side nearer the castle, will be the kraken's territory. The other half belongs to you. Fish it freely as long as you don't cross into the side near the castle." "The Lord is merciful," Luke said, visibly relieved. He took the news back to town, and soon fishermen returned to the Black Lake. They observed an unspoken agreement to stay on the town side and never cross the invisible line. Once, a man capsized and almost drowned. A tentacle wrapped around him and hauled him ashore. That thawed the distance between the fishermen and the kraken. They began bringing it food, especially alcohol, which the creature seemed to enjoy, and the octopus, in turn, would herd schools of fish toward their nets, so they returned with full catches. Over time, the relationship warmed. The kraken would swim to the town shore to bask and accept offerings. Children bravely poked at its arms or hung from them mid-air while their parents watched without fear. Traveling merchants, bards, and tourists came to marvel from a safe distance. After settling the kraken, Duir returned to the castle to begin a different project, a forge. Since he had learned the goblin forging techniques, he had wanted to put them into practice. He possessed several boxes of mithril ore gifted by Balin, and regular shipments were promised from Moria. In the magical world, mithril, what goblins called goblin silver, was indispensable to many of their methods. To master those techniques, he would need to smelt and work mithril. Under Smaug's resentful glare, Duir had taken the mithril ore without pause. He set the 33rd floor of the tower aside as his workshop and first went below the mountain. He tunneled with magic until he located a small iron vein. It had been judged too poor for the dwarves who first cut the passage, but it suited Duir's purposes. Duir placed a fist-sized piece of mother mithril at the heart of the vein, then removed flame crystals from the mithril box and built an eggshell-like crystal barrier around the mother ore, mirroring the structure of the Balrog's old lair. The flame crystals generated incredible heat, melting the surrounding iron into glowing magma. Duir had drunk a fire protection potion and felt no burn. The molten iron flowed around the mother mithril like lava. He could feel an invisible radiation from the mother mithril seeping into the metallic magma, slowly transforming it into mithril. At first, the change was glacial, perhaps a gram a year, but as the flame crystals purified and bolstered the mother mithril, its radiance increased, and the conversion sped up. Without his goblin-like sensitivity to metal and magic, Duir might never have noticed the change. Once he was satisfied the process had begun, Duir collapsed the tunnel and sealed it. Perhaps in decades or centuries, a new vein of mithril would form there. It would never rival Moria, but it would be a local source. And with Balin gone and dwarf promises uncertain, that mattered. Back on the 33rd floor, he set about building the goblin furnace. He had intended to use flame crystals for the fire bricks, but their heat was so extreme that they would melt ordinary stone and iron. So Duir chose to be extravagant. He would build the furnace from mithril. Mithril is easy to melt only once. Once forged and cooled, it becomes exceptionally strong and heat-resistant. Even volcanic magma has trouble melting it. He prepared his tools, enlarged a mithril container with magic, placed flame crystals in the bottom, and added mithril ore. Under the crystal's infernal heat, the ore liquefied into flowing silver. Duer purified the metal and poured the molten mithril into a mold. When it cooled, he had a rough furnace. He did not allow it to cool completely. Wielding an iron hammer tipped with mithril, he struck the furnace's inner and outer walls in a steady rhythm, speaking spells and channeling magic through every blow. This was the core of goblin forging. Metal has memory. Forging was not only shaping but communicating with the metal, awakening its memory and impressing it with the maker's intent through runes, spells, and will. Each strike sent sparks, and the magic embedded with the blows merged with the mithril. Gradually, the furnace itself became infused with power. Duir then used a mithril graver to cut goblin runes into the inner wall. It took a week of relentless labor. Even with his potion keeping the worst heat at bay, he was drenched in sweat from exertion. At last, he stepped back and waited for the steam to clear. Aguamenti, he commanded, and a spray of cold spring water hissed over the metal. The furnace steamed but remained intact, its runes gleaming on a silvery, pot-bellied body like an alchemical vessel. He placed a few flame crystals inside. Remarkably, their ferocity was contained. Touching the outer metal felt cool. The interior, however, seemed to open into endless heat. He dropped in a piece of mithril ore. It melted instantly and impurities burned away, leaving pure mithril magma. Satisfied, he fed in several large boxes from Balin. The furnace accepted them all and liquefied them without strain. With a soft tap of his wand, the great furnace shrank until it fit in his palm, the mithril magma stable and contained. This was the goblin-inspired magic furnace Duir had built. It could expand its internal volume to accommodate ore, amplify heat to purify and melt even the hardest metals, and shrink for easy transport. Most crucially, it absorbed the qualities of the metals smelted in it, strengthening and self-repairing, as if learning from every forge. In short, with this furnace, Duir had laid the strongest possible foundation to become a forging master in Middle-earth. Chapter 179, Mithril Sword. Once the furnace was finished, Dewey set it in the center of the forging chamber and placed the flame sword inside, subjecting it to intense heat and roaring flames. The flame sword had been made by Thorin and several dwarf smiths, reforged from an ancient corpse sword with a scrap of mithril and inscribed with runes of fire. Gandalf had once used it to channel the holy Arnor fire against the Balrog's Udun fire during their duel in Moria. That did not mean the sword itself innately possessed that power. Gandalf had merely used the blade as a conduit. Now Dewey intended to reforge the flame sword again, using goblin forging methods to make it far stronger. Bronze could not compare to mithril, and this time he planned to use an even rarer material, the mother of mithril. Dewey first laid the flame sword in the furnace. True to its dwarven lineage, the blade resisted melting. Even in the furnace's heat, it liquefied only slowly. He added extra flame crystals to accelerate the process. Under his watch, the sword finally dissolved into a pool of molten bronze, impurities burning away until only a small, pure lump of bronze remained beside a thumb-sized pool of molten mithril, the original mithril fragment Thorin and the smiths had worked into the blade. Small as it was, it represented Thorin's greatest sincerity. Dewey removed his fist-sized mother of mithril, split it in two, and placed one half into the inferno. The mother of mithril was far tougher and more heat-resistant than ordinary mithril. Even the Balrog's flames had failed to melt it. At first, the mother of mithril simply lay unmoved in the furnace's blaze. Dewey poured in all the remaining flame crystals. With the furnace's firepower increased tenfold, the core glowed a higher, purer blue, the temperature surging past anything volcanic. The bronze began to vaporize, and slowly, the mother of mithril started to soften. Impatient, Dewey pointed his wand at the fire inlet and cast Fiend Fire. The destructive flames fused with the furnace's heat, turning the blaze a blue-purple hue and forcing the mother of mithril to melt faster. A week later, the half-fist-sized mother of mithril had finally liquefied. The melted flame sword's bronze had shrunk to a tiny, extraordinarily pure essence, gleaming almost like gold. Mithril was unparalleled in lightness and enchantment conductivity, but a blade of pure mithril would be too light to wound effectively. Dew fused the light, radiant mother of mithril with the dense, stable bronze essence to create an alloy of ideal weight, combining mithril's corrosion resistance and magical affinity with bronze's sturdiness. He took the fused metal and, once it had solidified, hammered it with a mithril hammer tuned to a unique frequency. Each strike poured magical energy into the alloy through the mithril tool, further blending mother of mithril and bronze. When he judged it properly forged, he returned the alloy to the furnace to be remelted and calcined, letting the metals and magic react together. He repeated this cycle, forge, hammer, remelt, for 3 months. At the end of that grinding labor, the mother of mithril, bronze, and embedded magic had become indistinguishable, their metallic memory fully activated. The alloy had been shaped into a sword blank. Dai then carved runes on the blade with a mithril engraving knife and immersed the sword in molten mithril for patination. After polishing, he plunged the glowing red blade into a prepared blood-red quenching bath, an alchemical goblin potion he had brewed from dragon blood. The sword cooled rapidly, drawing into itself the potion's essence and taking on an otherworldly sheen. After further tempering and finishing, another 3 months passed, and finally a long, slender sword gleamed complete. The blade shone silver, with a subtle golden tint from the bronze within. Its hilt was cruciform. The crossguard bore a carved phoenix at its center and ended in crown-shaped tips inlaid with red gemstone facets. A large red stone crowned the pommel. These were not true rubies, but flame crystal carved into gem shapes, and curiously, they no longer burned. Embedded in the hilt, the crystals emitted only a gentle warmth, so that the sword always felt comfortably warm to its wielder, even in bitter cold. Along the blade, an elvish inscription read, "Duir, holder and master of the flame sword, wielding the fire of judgment, eliminating all enemies of darkness." Arwen herself had written the words, both to name sword and master, and to infuse it with a will and power to judge and purge darkness. Dewey admired the work that had taken him 6 months and felt a swell of pride. "Flame sword," he called. In an instant, the sword that had rested on the forging table vanished and reappeared in his hand. He tested the weight and smiled. The sword had been suffused with his spirit during forging and had recognized him as its master. Wherever he stood, a summons would bring it to his hand. No one could wield the flame sword without his permission. If taken by someone with ill intent, it would grow intolerably hot, inflicting burns at best and death at worst. Because the blade was made from mother of mithril, it was near indestructible and resisted spells, even the killing curse. Most remarkable, by goblin forging principles, the flame sword could absorb materials and properties to strengthen itself. Dewey poured a crystal vial of basilisk venom over the blade. The sword drank in the venom, acquiring its corrosive, lethal qualities. Now a mere cut would flood a victim with deadly poison. Elated, Dewey next thrust the sword into the corpse of a Balrog. The flame sword consumed the Balrog's essence, learning to devour and channel flame. He cast fiendfire toward the blade and watched it swallow the infernal fire like a starving whale. When the sword released flame again, some of the fiendfire's terrible properties clung to its attacks. Finally, with a hand that shook despite his excitement, he took a vial of Arundel's light, the dew of starlight, and let a few drops fall onto the blade. The starlit dew cleansed the sword. Its metal seemed to brighten and refine. The flame crystals in the hilt cleared, losing any taint of the Balrog's darkness. To Dewey's surprise, the blade proved capable of actively drawing starlight when Arendel's star shone overhead. Since Arendel's light had great power against dark creatures, a sword that could absorb and store starlight would become a bane to them. To allow it as much exposure as possible, Dewey placed the blade atop Amonsul so it could drink the star's light. With the reforging complete, Dewey set aside the anvil and furnace for a time and turned his attention to alchemy. Goblin forging and wizard alchemy shared much in common. As his craft advanced, so did his understanding of alchemical principles. His greatest alchemical ambition was to create a philosopher's stone, an anchor for long life. The Book of Abraham recorded a method, but without a deep foundation in alchemy, the task was vast and perilous. So Dewey sought help from an unexpected source. His future father-in-law, Lord Elrond of Rivendell, who was the wisest and most learned of Middle-earth. Elrond had not wholeheartedly approved of Dewey's relationship with Arwen, yet his love for his daughter made him unwilling to see her forsake her immortal life because Dewey could not secure longevity. Given the blueprint for the Philosopher's Stone in Dewey's runic dictionary, Elrond had quietly applied his infinite knowledge. In a remarkably short time, he mastered the runes to a depth Dewey could not yet reach and gained a profound understanding of the Philosopher's Stone's making.